Fate, Souls and Singularities by Mundatorem Chapter 191–195. Shadow of the Lake. Repeat that to me. A grunt from the one who spread the news. They spared her barely a glance as they turned over their shoulder and looked at her. She knew them as one of the other servants, the druid or along those lines with the fur hood and the blue hair. The one whose counterpart was a lancer. The saber from Fuyuki, King Arthur or whatever the heck they would call themselves now. He drank once more. She had to hold herself back from slapping the mug from his hand and shaking him down for answers. She could already feel her hands balled into fists by her side. Mere happenstance led her here at this time and place and allowed her to listen in on the news, though she was sure it would have come to her eventually. You mean to say that King Arthur, King of Camelot, is currently in Chaldea, at this very moment? A raised eyebrow, the caster Cu shot her a look before they replied slowly. That is what I just said, yeah. Not sure if she's like me though. Looks the same as I remember her being for the latter part of that war, though that was after something really nasty happened. He grimaced as though recalling something, scratching his chin. Though she had long since stopped listening to his words by this point. King Arthur was here. The King Arthur that Gareth served was finally here. That meant they could finally act. Where are they? The man was midway through the drink when she asked. They raised a single finger towards her in a gesture for her to wait. She felt her lips pulled tight and her jaw clench hard. Her posture straightened as she stared at them with mounting irritation. Being so close and then waiting for something like this, they were supposed to be ready at a moment's notice and this fool was slumming away in a tavern like a common drunk. It very nearly made her blood burn, though she was able to hold herself back from reacting immediately. Pulling the glass tankard from his hand, he smacked his lips twice before he spun around in his seat, leaning on the counter of the bar and then looking her up and down, lips pursed as he did so with a sharp look in his eyes that had not been there before. Suppose I tell you this right now, what exactly are you gonna go off and do? Because no one is in that big of a rush unless they're about to do something. That is no concern of yours. I didn't say I was concerned, I meant your master. The interruption was made with a roll of the eyes and a careless wave of the hand. Because in any other situation, I would have just told you to go for it and anything else that happened was your own fault. Can't really afford to do that now, so I need a bit of warning in case the walls are gonna come falling down around us because you ran your mouth at. She stepped closer. His seated position gave her the advantage of height as she loomed over them. My reasons are my own and if you do not tell me, I shall find the information out for myself. So I shall ask you one further time before I discover it with my own power. Where is King Arthur? A long sigh was the response. The man rolled his eyes at her and then pushed out of the chair, rising slightly above her as he did so but little else. The two of them locked gazes as he smacked his lips a few times, blinking a couple more, and then rubbing his eyes with his hand before he frowned at her. My question remains the same here, pal. If I tell you, are you going to go around starting shit where none needs starting? Because there are a couple of rumors I overheard about you and a certain berserker. So, either you tell me what you're going to do or I go off and let our masters know and they can deal with it instead. My business with S. She cut herself off. She did not feel as though he deserved the title. My business with Lancelot is for me and me alone to concern myself with. As for King Arthur, you may rest assured that I have no intention of standing before them to request a duel or invoke violence between the two of us. It is a matter of importance to me that I speak with them and nothing else. Cu Chulain maintained his gaze for a moment longer, then let out another grunt as he turned and lowered himself back into his stool. Clasping the handle of his tankard and moving to closer. She growled at him and turned around, making for the door as she did so. One floor up. That's the extent of my knowledge on the matter. She paused at the voice from behind her, turning her head slightly to allow the caster to come into her field of vision. The man spoke in an exasperated tone of voice. You better not start any shit here, pal. Because otherwise I'm gonna feel pretty annoyed about all of it. Her lips thinned and she nodded once. You have my word that I shall not repeat the actions of Lancelot with King Arthur. She continued on walking before they could reply. the information she received from them was more than enough for her at the moment. With news of King Arthur's arrival, she was sure that Gareth would be in high spirits. Until then, she had a promise to uphold. If only to herself, if no one else. It was surprisingly easy to come across the room where King Arthur had made theirs, or had been assigned, whichever of the two came first, but it was hardly important. Standing before it filled her with a sense of apprehension. Ironically, it had been easier to march into the simulator and draw her sword of Lancelot than to come here and face them herself. Still, she remembered King Arthur from that festival in Rome from some time ago. They seemed of the honorable sort, so she was certain they would hear her out and respond to her request to the best of their ability. It would be strange if they did not do so, or perhaps already had plans to do so if they were aware of Lancelot's being here. That was the only conclusion she could come to. Reaching out, her knuckles rapped against the front of the door with several heavy bangs before she drew the arm back and waited. Folding them behind her back as she did so and staring at the door. Seconds ticked by. Her brows gradually furrowed as the seconds turned into a minute with no sign of anything happening. She brought her hand up and tapped on the front of the door again. She knew for a fact they were inside the room, she could sense them within. Yet they made no effort to answer the door, which was a touch bewildering to her. Still nothing from the door. She was beginning to debate whether she should just forego everything and open it up. Though she didn't want to interrupt whatever they were doing, she just considered this to be more important. Wetting her lips, she brought her hand up for a third time and made to repeat the gesture, only to pause at the hiss that came from beneath her feet. The door slid open and revealed the form of King Arthur in front of her. She blinked, looking down at the figure and pulling her lips into a frown for a touch of a second before they widened. The sensation that flooded her was something else entirely. The blackened texture of their clothes and the very air around them, they had been touched by something dark. She stepped backwards, throwing her body into a ready stance and awaited the next actions with silence, not quite drawing her sword but being ready to do so at a moment's notice. What manner of fool knocks on my door and then makes ready to attack the moment it is answered? The insult shook her from her trance as she turned her eyes to the woman, her brows furrowed a touch more as she took in the features. They bore the same resemblance as the King Arthur she recalled meeting, but there was something wrong. The expression was bereft of any sort of emotion, and it was the eyes which struck her the most. They were a dull yellow, pale, much like the skin and hair of the servant. You are not King Arthur. Fool. She was silenced immediately, but the tone of voice that had her clamp her jaw shut, the presence of the words was as though it commanded her very nature. The eyes narrowed dangerously. You come here expecting King Arthur, and it is them you have discovered. What business have you with me? For I have no recollection of ever meeting with or seeing you before in any previous summon. She watched them for a moment, then spoke slowly. You have memories of previous summons? Vaguely. Arthur replied with a single grunt. The pale yellow eyes did not waver from her face, nor did they look at her with anything less than clear dismissal. Lacking the touch of warmth they had when she last recalled meeting with her. Though if you can ask such a foolish question, then you must be aware of other versions of me. I am indeed King Arthur. Whether this version meets your expectations is no concern of mine. More silence, then they grunted and waved a hand to her. Now, speak quickly or depart. I have little patience to entertain loiterers. The words dragged her focus back to her. She straightened herself out and put to rest the brief confusion as to the change that had occurred. Perhaps a slight difference in summoning or whatever had been done to her to bring about this form. Cu had alluded to something happening during his own conflict, but she had not thought anything of it at the time. I am Esser Verndari of Drangolic. I am here to speak with you on a matter of importance and to make a request to you. King Arthur didn't so much as blink. Are you aware that Sir Gareth and Lancelot are currently within Chaldea at this very moment? A brief pause, then a small moment before Arthur gradually brought her arms up and folded them over her chest. Her eyes briefly flickered with interest before they returned to the same dispassionate stare. Oh, so that was the identity of those servants. I sensed others from the round table were present, yet I was not aware of the identities. So then, what is this request you have of me? It pertains to Lancelot. Sir Lancelot. Arthur corrected as though it was little more than a reflex, though she fought back her noise of discomfort when they made the correction. She supposed they were technically still a knight, regardless of whether she believed they were worthy of the position. Do not let your dislike of them so quickly color your judgment. Shall I suppose then, that this relates to Sir Gareth and their history? Given your show of respect to them, King Arthur was indeed rather sharp. I shall not deny it. Through my own research into the matter, I have found that following his actions, Sir Lancelot did not receive any official punishment nor call for punishment from the crown. Rather, his exile was self-imposed and you forbade any efforts to track him down and bring him to justice for his actions. I am aware. Their response was almost insultingly bland, then their brows twitched for just a moment. Did you come here to make some manner of demand of me? Or was it merely just to regale me with events I was present to witness? I would ask why you allowed such a thing to occur in the first place. Verndari replied to them without waiting for much longer. I do not see a need to explain my actions to you. Arthur dismissed without even missing a beat. The difference between the end of her sentence and the beginning of theirs was virtually non-existent. Verndari understood that, in principle, she had no right to the thoughts of King Arthur given the difference between the two of them. That was fair and true, yet that did not make it burn any less at the blatant non-answer she received. My choice was made then and there. Something you should accept. Her jaw clenched. I would ask that you look back on this decision and rescind your inaction for this moment. She worded it carefully to avoid making it sound too much like a demand. Though Arthur merely responded with a touch of a raised eyebrow and little else, as though all of this was somehow beneath her concern. It bubbled her anger deep within her to consider, though she avoided letting it slip just yet. Given the passage of time and the crimes he committed, as well as their impact, I would ask that you at least come forward and condemn his actions. With the benefit of hindsight, I would ask that you see what he wrought. Why? The single word stopped her in her tracks, if only because it was delivered with so little emotion and so casually that she found herself struck by it. Why? What did they mean why? It didn't make sense to her in the least. Surely they would have understood why she was asking for this, for the benefit of those who could at least see something regarding justice done. So that the crimes Lancelot committed were addressed by the king themselves, as opposed to just her. Perhaps they meant why was she doing this? I am a friend of Sir Gareth and I did not ask your relation to my knights. Arthur cut her off before she could finish. I asked why you believe that my decision should be changed now. Especially at this point in time. It would seem a futile effort, given the nature that we all occupy. She stood there, unable to speak. Words did not form in her mind as she maintained a silent stare towards Arthur. She wasn't quite sure she heard that right, and yet they had spoken so clearly that she could not have heard anything else. They had said such an outrageous thing to her with a straight face. Are you truly asking me why I believe that you should publicly condemn Sir Lancelot's behavior? The question was posed to her in a slow manner, to make sure that Arthur absolutely understood what she was trying to say to her. Because I believe that it should go without saying. Given the role he played in the deaths of Sirs Gareth, Gaheris and Agravain, I believe it would at least warrant something on behalf of them. Even if one were to set aside the fact he committed treason against your own kingdom. Arthur scoffed loudly. I do not need reminding of the crimes Lancelot committed. Least of all by someone with second-hand knowledge. I am aware, I know what occurred and I maintain the same stance then as I do now. If you have an issue with that, then it is of your own doing. Do not involve me with your own disgruntled stance on whether justice was done or not. Her hands clenched into fists. This is not a matter of whether justice was done. It was not done. That can be no other stance to view from. A sharp intake of breath later, she lowered her voice. Respectfully, King Arthur, I am asking if you intend to do anything with the knowledge that Sir Lancelot is here and now. If you intend to confront him on the nature of his actions. A blank look. For what reason would I go out of my way to speak with Sir Lancelot now about such a thing? They looked as though they were inconvenienced by the mere thought of it. The actions taken in life do not change with death. Even with the knowledge of what occurred in the aftermath. I have already made my judgment on Sir Lancelot. To decide here and now to change my decision on the matter would be an embarrassment and undermine my own strength. It was my ruling that Sir Lancelot be allowed to depart with no pursuit against him, along with Guinevere. They paused for a moment and waved their hand. Guinevere was sentenced to death per the laws of the land. Lancelot acted out of his own heart and saved her. This led to the deaths of the knights you speak of. Justice against them would be futile and take much needed resources from Camelot. Chasing them down would be both pointless and outside of my own interests. He slept with your wife and murdered your knights. Arthur raised a brow. Should a wife be expected to maintain her affection for a husband who cannot love her as a woman? Our marriage was nothing more than a political symbol. It was my own nature as a woman that brought about her downfall and her seeking Lancelot out. Nothing more and nothing less. Verndari steadied her breathing. It was as though she was trying to shoulder the blame for their own traitorous actions. Whether or not that was true was irrelevant. There was the cold hard evidence that Lancelot and Guinevere had committed adultery and that the same man had gone on to kill his sworn brothers and sisters of the Round Table in an act of fury brought about by his own sins. He was responsible for his folly, certainly not King Arthur. Her jaw clenched behind her helm. Setting aside your marriage woes, my point remains. What sins did Gareth, Gaheris and Agravain perform to earn this cold dismissal of their loyalty? You cannot blame another for this act. It is the hands of Lancelot that were stained with the blood of those he was sworn to serve with, who he did serve with for many years. She pointed down to the ground as she did so, her voice rising in volume. Arthur remained insultingly silent and looking utterly uncaring. A scoff rippled from the back of her throat. Is this the reward that loyalty to King Arthur grants you? She pondered aloud, taking a step backwards and looking Arthur up and down. Where before there might have been respect, now she felt only a sick disgust as she looked at them. Sir Gareth held you in such high esteem, she spoke so highly of the king she served and the one she pledged her very life to, and your reaction to her murder, the murder of her brothers, by the man who you swore into your court, who bedded your wife, is to say nothing more on the matter and let him run free. The words felt like acid in her throat. Arthur's eyes narrowed, taking a single step forwards and out of the room and into the hallway with her. Though the height difference between the two was obvious, it felt as though she had grown tall enough to look her right in the eye. The next words were delivered with a slow intensity, the subtle hint of warning. Do you have some accusation to make against me, knight of a foreign land? She took a deep breath. The loyalty you are shown by your knights is undeserved if this is how you repay them. Where is the value in serving a king who will turn a blind eye to injustice because the moment suits them? Even if you did not agree, especially if you do not personally agree, the laws of the land were clear. They must remain clear so that all could see none were above them. You should have executed Lancelot yourself. If not for the adultery, then for the sake of the knights he slew. She made a half turn. But if you are incapable of even that basic level of respect to those who swore themselves to your banner, then you are no king worth serving. A tyrant and little else. She started walking away from them, the budding words in the back of her throat echoed through the halls. A king who knows not the hearts of those who serve them. Barely a few steps later, she felt a pressure wash over her, causing her to miss a stride and stumble. It was barely a second after that. Something tight gripped the back of her armor and dragged her backwards, whipping around and being thrown backwards. Something bent behind her, but that meant nothing to the glare now aimed into her eyes, the pale yellow orbs aimed solely through the helmet. Arthur let her have not even a moment to catch her breath. Do you believe you are granted either the power or authority to lay judgment upon my actions? That you and you alone are somehow important enough to dictate who is and is not worth serving? She opened her mouth to reply, perhaps somehow sensing that. Arthur forced her further into the wall with a tight grip against her collar. She heard the groaning of metal between the fingers of the king as they silenced her with the single gesture. Understand this single fact. Their eyes narrowed. You are not worthy of that. You are a guard who served in the court of a king with, I would wager, barely an amateur's understanding of politics or the difficulties of having one serve beneath them. Perhaps I should have slain Lancelot where he stood the moment the affair came to light. I did not. It is not for you to question that decision after the fact when you were not there in the moment. They shook her once more, dragging her closer to them. Suppose I did as you asked and went to Lancelot now. What good would my condemnation of his actions do? We are servants and, by nature, any justice I would dole out would be worth less than nothing. Arthur's eyes narrowed into slits, a deep fog started to roll from her body, physically pressing her further down, robbing the air from her lungs. There are no courts to recognize my ruling, there are no punishments to inflict upon him, and there is nothing it could do to prevent the fall of Camelot. It would serve nothing more than to satisfy my own personal ego for the brief window in which I walk this earth. The dark servant growled, the collar was crushed further. And when that time came to an end, I would forget it was ever an event to begin with. For both Lancelot and myself, it would be an utterly futile endeavor. With a sharp movement, they dragged their fingers back, the support collapsed and Verndari slid down the wall with a grinding sound, still unable to breathe as she stared up at them, cold eyes glaring down at her, as though daring her to try anything. To her shame, she remained silent and still. Has Sir Gareth, at any point, indicated that she bears a grudge towards Sir Lancelot or that she seeks out vengeance? Pathetic. Arthur scoffed loudly. You make a claim of friendship and yet act against her own wishes. For what purpose would this serve now? Nothing more than your own quest for satisfaction. There is no justice to be had, merely the right to boast loudly that Lancelot has at last been punished for his crimes in a move that will only be remembered for mere months at best. It is a pitiful show of justice and speaks loudly of your own character. What you seek is vengeance for an action centuries old and justice dealt out to a ghost. Nothing more. They turned around, marching for the door to their room. Do not bother me again with such petty demands again. Nor should you insult the judgment of those who pledge their swords to me, or believe that I ever considered them as nothing. All on the round table were equal to me. Regardless of their origin. They paused, then shot a look over their shoulder. Pursue this matter on your own, but do not pretend as though you do anything less than enforcing your own shallow beliefs on another. This act of self-righteousness will benefit none but yourself. Her lip wavered, she was on her feet before the king could leave. It's not right. Silence, only the sound of her shout echoing through the walls. Arthur stopped walking. She trusted him. She trusted him so implicitly, and he just crushed her skull like it was nothing. He just kills her on the spot. He trained her to be a knight, he trained her to be a member of the Round Table, and he just killed her. No matter how you look at that, he is in the wrong in every sense of the word. You cannot just let that go unanswered. It just wasn't right. It wasn't fair. She won't hold it against him because of how much she owes him, because of everything he did for her. She can look past his sins and let the matter rest, but that doesn't make it any less of an evil. A crime is not absolved because the victim does not hold their murderer with any ill will. That's not how it works. That's not how it should work. You, especially you, have to see just how wrong it is. It's not fair. Why does Gareth have to be murdered in such a brutal manner while her killer walks free? Why does Lancelot live while she and so many others die? She was breathing deeply now, taking a step forwards and growling. You cannot just turn away from this. Maybe it's worthless, but justice isn't about shouting it to the skies. It's not about whether anyone will remember it down the line. It's about doing it in the moment because it is the right thing to do. It's about making a stand even if everyone else believes it's wrong. If you, in your heart, believe that what Lancelot did is unworthy of punishment, then you are evil. Arthur slowly turned around to face her, expression still devoid of feeling. Believe what you will. It shall change nothing in the end. They replied with the same uncaring tone of voice. Perhaps you speak truth, the fate of Gareth is indeed unfair. However, what will Fury do to correct this fate now? Shedding tears for the fates of those who met unjust ends will drown you long before you even reach an ounce of the total number. My point remains. Both Lancelot and Gareth are dead now, they have both met their ends. That isn't the point. That is precisely the point. There are many who would decry that we suffer for our actions against them. As a knight, I doubt your own hands are devoid of blood. Did you go your entire life without spilling a single drop or slaying a single man whose death would bring grief to another? Did you at any point face the fury of those who demanded justice? That went without saying. She was the final test to serve in the king's guard. Those who failed were killed by her. Dozens of loyal soldiers fell to her, but it was not the same. Not even close to being the same. I served my king loyally. And Lancelot served his heart. Arthur scoffed, turning around once more and stepping into the room. In those moments, we were all his enemies. My chance to punish his crime died with Camelot and myself. Its chance has been and gone. Nothing else needs saying. The door closed immediately after. She stood in the halls, alone and in complete silence. Staring blankly at the door to King Arthur's room. She turned from them immediately and started to march away, uncaring as to where her feet would carry her. Just that she was moving as far away from that room as possible. Her hands balled in tight fists. Her jaw clenched tight enough that she could have cracked her own teeth. A sound reached her ears, as though it was a flap of wings and the patter of tiny feet on the ground. She paused and looked over her shoulders, narrowing her eyes and finding nothing within her line of sight, nor could she sense anything. With a shake of the head, she continued on her walk. There was one place she could go. It was mostly a blur for her, between entering the simulator and turning it on. Everything else passed her by like a series of images and emotions, little else. Hacking, slashing and stomping on whatever opponent appeared before her. Skeletons, wyverns, ghouls. All of them were targets that just blurred together after what felt like such a long time, long enough that she was beginning to tire. Her shield and sword felt like weights in her arms. With each swing her movements became more clumsy, but she cared nothing for that. At some point, she lost her shield, or she dropped it. She couldn't really remember which, and she was just swinging around with her hands. The crunch of bone, the splatter of false blood and her own pounding heart in her ears was all that she could hear. Propelled only by her own feelings. It wasn't like she was wrong. There was nothing wrong with her stance. It was King Arthur that was in the wrong, surely. Everything she knew pointed towards Lancelot deserving punishment. It all aimed itself towards him being the one who was in the wrong and had evaded the justice his victims were rightfully owed. She had thought that of all the people wronged, surely King Arthur would have understood, but instead she was treated to the words of a cold tyrant, nothing more. Justice was never about achievement or for the rights. It didn't lose its value because it was ephemeral. Justice was about right and wrong. Even a blind man could tell that what Lancelot had done was wrong. He had killed those whom he had befriended, betrayed the trust of all those he had served with and sworn his loyalty to. He had done all of that, and at the end, he had forced his own punishment on himself through exile. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. It wasn't justice. She couldn't be the only one who understood that it was for the principle of the matter. It was so that the people could understand that there was justice. That there was order, that those who committed wrongs would not escape. That there was something they could rely on to protect them, to keep them safe if nothing else. If it had been anyone beside Lancelot, she did not believe they would have approached them with the same level of apathy. That made it worse, as though relation to the king would spare you from the consequences of your own actions. How could anyone work with a figure who would practice such actions? How could they even think to dismiss her demands in such a cold way? Gareth cared too much for Lancelot because she owed him too much. She wasn't Gareth and she owed Lancelot nothing. She could see his faults for what they were and she could see the injustice clear as day. There was nothing else that could be said. Lancelot murdered his closest friends and allies. He betrayed not just King Arthur but all of Camelot, and then he escaped his due punishment with Queen Guinevere. A loveless marriage. What manner of ill-conceived excuse was that? She had stood by and watched as a marriage born of one-sided love had ripped the kingdom apart, how the only man who had seen the queen for what she truly held in her heart was beaten and ousted from the very kingdom he strove to protect. Was this how justice was dealt in Camelot? Was this the kingdom that so many saw as great? Was that the king who deserved the title of King of Knights? She knew in her heart that such actions, betraying those who you were sworn to, were utterly unforgivable. The same standard was held for her that she held for others. Yet when it truly counted, when it was truly the most important for her to make a stand and to speak up, she held her tongue like a coward. Ultimately, it was all her fault that. Her head snapped backwards as something slammed into the front of it. A sharp gasp escaped from her as her sword slipped from between her fingers and thudded to the ground. 2 steps backwards and she turned her head to the attacker. Some manner of armored soldier with a spear, the construct rushed forwards with another thrust. She growled and stepped to the side, grabbing the shaft as it thrust past her and swinging her arm out. She caught the construct beneath the chin as she wrenched the spear from its grasp. She flipped it around and roared at the top of her lungs, holding it in both hands like a club and swinging forwards into the face of the being. A sound of splintering wood as they fell backwards, the spear having been shattered down the middle from where she struck them. It barely registered with her as she threw herself onto them with a snarl more consistent with an animal, utterly uncaring to how it looked as she just started punching. There was no form, no grace, just wild aggression. Her fists rose and fell again and again. Even when the construct vanished, she just kept on punching, burying her knuckles in the false mud and continuing onwards. Her hands clasped over her head and she swung down. Mud splattered along the front of her armor, now painted with grime and blood from the long battle. She lay there on her knees, hunched over and with her hands in the center of a wet puddle in the fake ground. Only her heavy breathing could be heard. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. The words repeated again and again, unsure of who she was even apologizing for. She didn't know the names of everyone in the kingdom, but she was the one who bore the blame for all those who perished from Nashandra's machinations. She didn't act when she should have. It was her fault. It would always be her fault. Nothing she ever did would fix that. Nothing she ever forced out of Lancelot would change Gareth's death. They were gone and they could never be fixed. Her hands splayed out in the mud, digging in and clawing tight, dragging grooves into it as she did so. Panting deeply all the while she whispered apologies. A sound reached her ears. Her head snapped up and towards the direction of the noise. Applause. Sitting on a small rock was a woman wearing a dark cloak, hood drawn up and features hidden from view, though not so hidden that she could not see the black painted lips pulled into a clearly amused grin as they brought their hands up and down, continuing to clap as though they had seen something amusing. Her first instinct was to freeze up at being seen in this state. The next thought was to rapidly rise to her feet and whirl on the individual who had entered without her knowledge. The growl in the back of her throat was unable to give way to words before the woman spoke up. That was a rather impressive display of brutality, certainly one of endurance as well. Her words felt mocking, as though she was telling a joke. The mirth in her voice was apparent at any rate. Swinging a sword here for well over an hour without taking a break. I doubt this exhaustion of yours is anything other than mental. I would say that there is something that burdens your mind. The woman brought a hand to her chin, pinching it between her fingers and tilting it to the side. Now what is it that would usually trouble a knight such as yourself? Especially to bring you to such a state that you would fall to your hands and knees like that. It does seem to be a touch beyond what you would usually go for, does it not? Leave. Verndari croaked as loud as she could, hands clenching tight to the point she could hear her armor creak in protest. The woman released a single huff of amusement. So soon. But I came all the way down here because I was worried about you. She felt a great wave of unease and disgust wash through her at those words. She knew who this was and the mere thought of having this one's attention upon her was more than enough for her to be on alert. Chaldea had already felt the ramifications of this fool's concerns and she felt as though she could certainly do without those. Velka sighed for a moment, dropping her hands onto her lap and leaning her head forwards. You make your dislike of me all too clear. What is the point of wearing a helmet if you're going to make everything obvious in the first place? Oh well, some people are just easy to read, I suppose. I do not need to listen to this. She made for the door. Was it not the way of knights that they should pay proper respect for monarchs? I am still a queen, you know. I do not believe in the gods. Another empty huff of air from the goddess, shaking her head from side to side before she waved a hand. I come to you with the intent of soothing your aching soul and you greet me with such cold words. Verndari scowled behind her helmet. You should consider yourself lucky I did not greet you with cold steel. The thought is growing increasingly appealing. Velka sucked in air, making a face as she did so, all while her eyes gleamed with unhidden mirth, not at all affected by the very obvious threat made against her just now. That was very nice, very witty. You should watch yourself around Guinevere, she always did have an appreciation for those who had something of a dry wit. She wasn't interested in this. With a grunt of dismissal she tuned the goddess out as she made for the door. Only a few steps later, she was halted by the words of Velka yet again. I was privy to your conversation with King Arthur. She whirled on Velka, snarling as she did so. Are you so debased that you must eavesdrop on a conversation that you were shouting about in the hallways where others live? The goddess cut her off, an unimpressed look on her face as she did so. It is through my generosity alone that you did not have a dozen heads opening their doors to see what the fuss was about. A little appreciation would go a long way, you know. It's important to thank people when they do you a kindness out of the goodness of their heart. Goodness. Her lip curled down, her arms were brought up and folded themselves over her chest. This goodness which has unleashed doom upon us, and the same goodness which saw nearly a dozen of our own cut down. Chaldea has seen enough of your goodness to last a lifetime, and if you have come to me with this same intention, then it is all the more prudent that I flee from you before I come to harm. The goddess thankfully fell silent, the amused expression on her face vanishing for the first time since they had started speaking. It was vindictive, but she enjoyed watching the grin disappear. Probably a bit too much, but she was getting her amusement where she could find it in this situation, especially with her current feelings. If you came here too. I came here because you're a hypocritical liar. Verndari stilled, her eyes narrowed into slits. Excuse me. Velka tilted her head. I thought the senses of knights were supposed to be honed through many battles. Surely you are not so hard of hearing that my comment flew like a bird well above your head. Her hand clenched into a fist, the weight of her sword fell into her grasp. No. I needed to be absolutely certain you had indeed said what I thought you said. I would tread carefully, if I were you. It is dangerously close to insulting me. The goddess merely scoffed at her. Is that what you're going to do? Swing at me because you disagree with my words? With a click of her tongue, Velka looked away and raised her hands in a helpless gesture. Honestly, I like to think that someone such as yourself would be a little more skilled in the art of dialogue, especially given your own history with lying. She took a single step towards Velka and growled, What did you just saw? Must I spell it out for you? The eyes of the goddess bore into her for several short seconds, then her voice dropped down into a low whisper, yet it still bounced around within her helmet. I'm talking about the sheath between your legs. She froze. I don't know what you. Yes you do. A disinterested flick of the hand and Velka was rising up from her seated position, sighing as she did so. But I don't care all that much about it. Especially given that the Silver Knights had women within their own numbers, so really, I consider your little kingdom's customs to be a touch backwards in regard to who could and could not serve. But that is neither here nor there. Her posture tightened, the thought of striking the goddess down did briefly flicker through her mind before she crushed it down. Instead her shoulders trembled for a mere moment before they fell. She could not muster the energy to become enraged and attack the goddess. She had already burned through all of that anger. What are you here for? Did I not make it obvious? I'm here for you, Velka replied, shrugging her shoulders as she did so. But I suppose a good point to begin would be your role. Guardian of King Vendrick and the one who judged those who sought to become a member of the royal guard. Those who bested you were allowed entry and those who failed. A coy smile pulled on the lips of the goddess. Well, they weren't granted the luxury of a second chance, were they? She stayed silent. It wasn't that she was ashamed, she was just confused as to what this had to do with anything. You killed all those who pledged their loyalty to the king, the very same king as you. I would say you made a career of doing that. Spreading her arms wide, the goddess smiled at her in a way that was much too sharp. One that I am certain you hold in quite high regard, as well you should. The secret proof that a woman was just as capable in the field of slaughter as a man. Even if it never came to light, that is neither here nor there. What is important though, is that you killed many, many dozens of loyal knights without so much as an ounce of hesitation. Verndari waved her free hand. What is the point of this? I already know my own role and what I was charged with doing. You killed those people because you ultimately believed it was right. That your actions were right and that those who stood before you and failed, well, that was right as well, wasn't it? Velka started to pace around her. And the only reason that you yourself never faced any punishment is because this was mandated by King Vendrick. Though I'm certain the families of the fallen and their friends might be a bit less inclined to forgive you or King Vendrick for what befell the failures. Those who stood before me knew the risks. Obviously. Velka scoffed loudly, shooting her a look. You do not become a knight with the belief that you will see a ripe old age unless you are either arrogant or incredibly optimistic. All those who swear themselves to the sword are likely destined to meet their end upon it. A moment of silence, then Velka clapped her hands together. But let us not speak of this. Let us return to Sir Lancelot who, like you, killed those who were sworn to the same king as he was. He did so because the one he loved, the Lady Guinevere, was doomed to be executed and he believed that saving her was right and true. So he follows his heart and then the rest is history. Why is one unforgivable to you but the other is acceptable? Verndari blinked behind her helmet. She could not even be angry at such an absurd sentence. Are you slow of mind? The two could not be further apart. A blink of surprise from Velka. Really? In what way? Either the killing of one's fellow knights is an unforgivable sin or it's acceptable. There isn't much of an in-between in the two. My actions were my duty. They were mandated by King Vendrick, by your own words. And is the silent inaction of King Arthur not a mandate for Lancelot and Guinevere? Velka cut her off with a raised eyebrow, turning to her and tilting her head. If King Arthur made no move against Sir Lancelot then, whether or not she agrees with what has happened, she accepts it as something that has occurred and sees no need to punish them for it. She glared hard at the woman, her grip on her sword so tight that she could hear it grinding between her fingers. There is a mountain of difference. My actions were sanctioned, ahead of time they were all known. The laws of the land were known. Sir Lancelot committed a wrong. He murdered his fellow knights in cold blood after it was exposed that he and the queen had bedded one another. How can that not be considered a wrong? Velka tilted her head. When did I say it wasn't? It was her turn to blink. Wah. But you just. I said that there was little difference between the two in principle. Certainly, there was a change in circumstances but at the end of the day, the two of you were just killing your comrades for what you believed was right and correct at the same time. Perhaps Lancelot has the excuse of an emotionally induced haze of fury over the thought of his beloved being executed, but you were fully aware the entire time. Velka fell silent, then sighed and waved her hands. But this brings us back to the main topic. Your dislike of Lancelot is a lie. Or rather, the reasoning behind it is. King Arthur made their judgment on the matter in life and it was settled there. I'm sure there would be many families who would demand King Vendrick kill you, laws or not, for what you did to their beloved spouses, brothers and friends. The human heart is a touch irrational when it comes to loved ones. The smile pulled itself up. The least you might do is confess your true reasoning as to why you so deeply dislike Lancelot. It is nothing more than a case of disagreeing with what happened because you have grown to like Sir Gareth. Indeed, Lancelot committed a sin and he never faced what you would call justice for it, but the king allowed their actions in all but decree, a silent admission of events. Regardless of the families involved, of which she was also a member. Velka stepped closer to her, a minor height difference between the two of them as she looked down at the goddess, who maintained her beatific smile. At the end of the day, Sir Verndari. You're furious because the one who you think of as a friend was killed in such a terrible way, in such a way that you cannot find it acceptable, and that her killer escaped what you tout as justice, but speak of it as it is. Vengeance. Her jaw clenched tight. The matter of treachery and the fall of Camelot, it is in the past now, but there is one little thing that haunts you still. Which is the treachery that you believe must be answered for? That of Sir Lancelot, or your own? The golden eyes bore into her own for a moment, then the goddess stepped backwards and put distance between them once more. But that is something that I cannot answer for you. You're free to come to me if you seek absolution, but I doubt you would be content with a mere donation and a few choice nothings whispered to you. She turned her head down, staring at her feet and keeping her gaze locked there. All the while she heard the rippling chuckle of the goddess start to fade away as they made for the door. As you were then, dear. Velka called back. She twitched at the name but kept silent. If you do seek to forgive yourself for whatever it is that troubles you, then you can always seek me out for it. If not, well, I'm sure there is someone that you might be able to confess to. The doors clamped shut, the words of Velka remained even after their speaker departed. Verndari stood there in silence, the sword slipped from her fingers and dropped to the ground with a dull thud, a sound she barely even reacted to. Her helm turned towards the direction of the crater not far from her. She stared at it in silence before her eyes fell back to her hands, bringing them up and turning them over to examine the splatters of mud and false blood across all of them. Her fingers clenched inwards for only a brief moment, then her arms dropped back to her side. She didn't know why it was. The thought of Gareth dying, the thought of her dying in that sordid way. Being killed in such a foul way by one she trusted. It struck a chord with her, she just couldn't agree with it. But King Arthur made their choice already. All she was left with, was nothing but her own feelings on the matter. What was she supposed to do with all of those anyway? Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. That little bit of cheer. Days in Chaldea were certainly getting more interesting. That was how Boudica would describe it in a way that didn't come out as being overly concerned, despite the fact that it would be earned perhaps 100 times over if what had gone on during the last week had been any indication. In fact, what had been going on during her tenure here was nothing short of impossible. Even as a servant she struggled to wrap her head around half of the things that had been going on. Just when you thought you were getting settled in, someone would come and sweep not just the rug but also the entire floor out from underneath you and leave you right back at square one. I think it looks clean. A small gasp escaped her as she whirled around, soon closing her eyes and letting out a faint sigh as she lowered her arms to her side and shook her head. Sigurd stood behind her with a curious expression painted on his features as she opened her eyes back up and leveled them with a playfully irritated look. Don't try to sneak up on me when I'm washing dishes. Sigurd inclined an eyebrow at her, then glanced down at the plate she held in her hands before bringing his eyes back to her. I'm sorry if I gave you a bit of a fright, I just noticed that you were doing an awful lot of staring at it. He paused for a moment, then she watched the playful twinkle enter his eyes and prepared for the inevitable remark. He brought his hand up, cupping his chin and angling his head to the side. Unless you have mastered the art of cleaning with your eyes, in which case, might you take me as your humble student? I've long since stared at things but never once have they oof. He let out a flat noise as she playfully slapped him on the shoulder with the back of her free hand. With an earnest chuckle, he stepped around to the side of her as she returned her focus to the sink. While I do tease, I was somewhat concerned. You were rather deep in focus and I feared that something might have been ailing your mind. He paused for a moment, then continued on. If you need someone to lend an ear, then mine are available to be detached. A short breath escaped her. I wouldn't so much say that I was concerned, just trying to play catch up with everything that has been happening around here, is all. Seems as though just when you get used to something, another problem just flies right into your face without any warning. Halting her movements, she turned to Sigurd and shrugged her shoulders. Might be me worrying about when the next problem is going to spring out of the ground. The man regarded her silently, moving his hand up to brush at his bushy mustache for a few moments before he let out another short hum. I have found that life is seldom full of dull times for those who held a bit of excitement in their lives. Why then, should our afterlives be any different? For better or worse, all our lives were marred with interesting times beyond our control. A single finger was raised as he continued. It should be a case of waiting for the next moment of interest when it strikes us, not concerning ourselves with if. Be they good or bad, just walking the road and expecting the next shock is all that we can do. He lowered the finger and placed his hands on his hips, nodding his head up and down. What do you think, good archer? The tanned man grunted as he walked past them, a rather optimistic way of phrasing that trouble is always brewing if you ask me. Despite his words, Boudica couldn't help but notice the ghost of a smile on his face as he spoke, though it just as quickly vanished as he continued on. That being said, there is such a thing as avoidable trouble, and I would say that this was certainly one such moment, but that is for me to think and for our master to choose differently. You don't sound all that upset about it. Archer hummed and shrugged as he moved back across the kitchen to the ovens. I've made it no secret that I am a rather different individual to all of you. The choices I would make might not always be considered the right ones to make at the time. He paused, then turned around to face the two of them, folding his arms over his chest. Though there has been a disturbing number of attempts on his life from servants within his own roster, I would consider it rather foolish to just accept them back without problem. Sigward hummed in response. I believe those are less the cause of malicious nature and more of mistaken ideals and troubled souls. With a solemn look, he glanced away and lowered his arms to his side. There are few things that can wound as deep as a broken heart. Archer, meanwhile, just frowned to himself before turning away from them. We all have our problems. It's a matter of putting them aside for the greater good that troubles me. When facing the end of humanity, I would argue that someone suffering from a broken heart would do well to consider their own position and whether they might put others at risk by remaining. A rather cold attitude to life. If you say so. It wasn't that Boudica exactly disagreed with him. In the interest of the greater good for humanity, she had put aside her hatred for Nero. Or at least put a lid on it. Getting angry wouldn't be anything more than self-gratification at this point. What was the point of killing a servant for a crime they committed in life? Her eyes lingered on the back of the archer servant before she slowly turned from them and towards the counter, having noticed some movement from it. Though if she had missed the movement, she wouldn't have missed the faint creaking noise as the currently unnamed berserkers sat themselves down into the stool, which let out a faint whine of protest. Berserker glanced down at it for a moment, a brief look of surprise on their face before they turned back with a grunt. The first thing Boudica noticed was the lack of joy on the face of the servant. If anything, they looked somewhat listless, their arms placed on the counter and their eyes drooping downwards with a frown on their face. Drying her hands, she approached the counter and came to a halt opposite them, leaning forwards and lowering herself slightly to catch their attention. Berserker jumped a bit at her presence, somehow having missed her, and straightened out and fixed her with an odd look, opening and closing their mouths several times before they finally dropped their expression, giving her a single nod and speaking one word. Morning. That certainly didn't seem right. Everything all right? Yes. Berserker answered quickly, much too quickly for her liking, prompting her to gaze at him in silence with an utterly blank expression. Their mismatched eyes met hers for only a few moments before they retreated from her gaze, flying in every other direction that wasn't facing her. All the while, their expression grew increasingly more uncomfortable before they finally caved. Dropping their shoulders, they let their head hang. No. She hummed as she gave them a once-over, the brief thought that something relating to the gods had prompted this from him. She had seen his reaction against even Caffrey, and now Chaldea was virtually a pantheon with the number they currently had roaming around. Would you like to talk about it? For a moment she thought they might have refused. The way their eyes darted up to her and she saw the flash of hesitation in their eyes nearly convinced her that they would shake their head and tell her no. Yet as quickly as it had arrived, it soon vanished and was replaced by only exasperation. They slowly nodded their head up and down as they brought their left hand up, placing it against their forehead and supporting their head with it. I'm just a little surprised by how swiftly my understanding of everything has changed. He grumbled quietly, though he sounded less annoyed and just genuinely confused. She hummed and encouraged him to continue. I go my whole life thinking that the gods were, not as I have met them. I had an image of them made from my experiences with them, and yet with all of this news of Gwyn and his own family turning against him, I'm just puzzled. Boudica nodded her head up and down. I can't speak for how the gods are when you were back home, but you'll find no shortage of pantheons around here where the gods are often bickering with one another, more often than not over whether one of them had been sleeping with a human or making bets over champions. She paused, the bare minimum knowledge provided by the Grail aiding her somewhat. Other times because they just didn't like one another. Berserker looked more troubled by that than she had expected, which was a little unusual because he never once struck her as someone who liked the gods, yet the news of them being divided and often at war with one another seemed to trouble him. I met the gods as they were united. I just thought they were all like that. He replied after a moment, scratching his hand over his head. Though, I did know of one who didn't agree with the others, so perhaps that should have been my first clue. I just didn't think about it at the time. She pursed her lips as she looked them up and down. Is that what has you troubled? That the gods aren't as you expected them to be? Smacking their lips, Berserkers shook their head from side to side. No, that isn't it. Though it is something I've been thinking about, I'm more troubled by my own arrogance once again, I suppose. She blinked at them, while many things sprung to mind. Arrogant hadn't been one of them. She would reserve that to those who actually deserve the title. Just after we visited Ritska, I thought that Chaldea could do something to make them more lively. They all looked much too sad for my liking, so I thought about finding a way to have them feel less sad. With a near helpless shrug of his shoulders, he rested his other arm back on the counter and shot her a mild grimace. I was probably getting ahead of myself at the time, but it just popped into my head. I remember feeling more motivated when I had a goal to work towards, even if it turned out to be a mistake in the end. I still felt alive, but I look around and it just feels a bit cold. They paused, then thinned their lips. No, not cold. You don't feel like you have the same bonds. There is talk of betrayal and theft, and I can't imagine something like that being right. So I wanted to do something to make everyone closer, secure the bonds, but I couldn't actually think of anything. Boudica had to take a moment to recover herself. It felt as though she had been bombarded with a lot, not to mention the rather depressing and overly critical way they had spoken about themselves and the time they wanted to make something. Though that would be addressed at another time, for right now there was this peculiar little plan they had tried and failed to concoct. Why didn't you ask Da Vinci for help? That would have been one of the first things she thought they would have done, given how close they were with the Berserker for some as of yet unexplained reason. Berserker stilled, then frowned and shook his head. I didn't want to have to constantly trouble Vinci with my problems. I know she would probably help me if I asked, but I just felt like this would be something I could do too. He trailed off for a moment. She saw the flicker of shame in his eyes before he turned away from her, blocking her view of them. Yet she had still seen them. I decided to do this and to go to Vinci would feel as though I was just accepting failure once again. I hoped I could accomplish this one thing, but it seems as though I'm stumped. Nonsense. They both turned to see Sigurd there, having appeared without any prior warning, the man giving Berserker a serious look as he leaned forwards and rested his hands flat against the counter. Hear me, young man. I shall accept no one slandering themselves such as that. You wish to bring about a festival to make merriment and keep it a surprise. Then that is all the better. Berserker blinked twice at them, then opened his mouth to speak, only for Sigurd to cut them off with a raised hand. A gentle smile formed over his face as he did so. And this was to bring the bonds of all in Chaldea closer, yes. Then it would be wrong to exclude yourself during this time. Even when one plans for joy, they can do so with their friends. You wish for this to be a surprise. Then all the better. I can think of no more a worthy goal. While she wouldn't have gone that far, Boudica couldn't help the pull of her lips into a smile at the man before she turned to the servant in front of them and nodded her head up and down, jerking her head to the saber servant at her side. While he's certainly excitable over this sort of thing, he isn't wrong. You're hardly going to bring everyone together if you're sitting here putting yourself down over struggling. But that's fine, she assured them before they could take her words negatively, waving her hand from side to side. That's all part of the process. Besides, I wouldn't mind giving you a hand in this sort of thing. Make that me too, Juan. Another bark from somewhere had them all jolt at the loud noise, their heads turned as one. Boudica had to sort through her memories to try and place the servant that had all but appeared next to them without any sort of prior warning. Perhaps she was getting a little too complacent with being caught by surprise. They weren't even using any sort of presence concealment in the first place. With puffy orange hair and a large bushy tail, hands and feet replaced by paws, the very animalistic servant rushed towards them and then loomed an arm over the top of Berserker with a sharp grin on her features which didn't look all that hostile, yet Berserker responded to her sudden appearance and proximity to him by sharply rising from his seat and out of her grip before she could even complete the movement. His eyes were wide for a few moments, he took an audible sniff before he narrowed his gaze at the servant, looking her up and down with rather deliberate movements before he squinted. She'd never seen them look that confused before, but then again, it wasn't that she could really blame him. She was trying to wrap her head around the sudden appearance as well, torn between annoyance at the sudden eavesdropping and relief that someone else was going to lend their aid. The servant remained frozen for a short moment, then placed her paws on her hips and sported a visible frown at the clear rejection of physical intimacy. "Hey, I'm not that bad, Juan. Weren't you the one talking about getting close a second ago?" "No, it's just that." Berserker seemed to struggle for the right words before they took another sniff of the air, this one lasting a little bit longer, and then replying in a troubled tone of voice. "You just smell divine." "Why thank you, Juan." The response was rather childish. The servant preened at what she assumed was a compliment and seemed to puff herself out a little more. Keeping this coat of mine luscious and well-groomed is a basic responsibility for someone who wishes to become the very best they can be for their Goshujin sama. A single finger was raised and Boudica focused her eyes on the long black claw which erupted from the tip of it and pointed straight towards the ceiling. She wasn't the only one, as Berserker similarly went cross-eyed as well, given that it was directly in his face. "In fact, I get the feeling that I might have been putting too much care into my appearance. It's almost like a bunch of really interesting things just happened and passed me by without anyone coming and letting me know. So you can be sure that I'm not going to let this chance slip past me, and I'm going to jump right back into the limelight where I belong, Juan." Berserker kept his eyes on the claw, then turned his head towards her. The helpless gaze he directed towards her was rewarded with a small shrug of her shoulders. He looked a little downcast at that for a moment, so she brought her gaze back to the servant and gave them a more scrutinizing look. "I get the feeling we haven't actually been introduced to one another." The woman turned to her, their ears immediately went ramrod straight as they retracted the claw and whirled on her, slamming their paws into the counter and slowly leaning forwards. Boudica felt a strange sense of foreboding as she started to lean away from them, with a feeling of bemusement gradually rising through her. "Strange, Juan. I don't think we've actually been in the same room before. I guess we just kept walking past each other." Then their eyes turned onto Sigurd. "How come you didn't introduce me, Juan? I thought we were friends. I was under the impression we were cordial acquaintances at best." Sigurd responded with a tone of honest confusion, especially when he raised his hands in surrender at her very nearly heartbroken expression. "I am not against us being friends, but our last meeting started with you throwing food and a table at us without warning. Then you asked to be let into the kitchen, and even excluding the fact you're covered in fur, well, the last time I saw you make food it turned into an explosive." They opened their mouth to reply, then slowly creased their brows together. The indignation gave way to confusion and then annoyed understanding as they folded their arms over their chest. "I knew that doing something so in the moment would end badly, Juan. I didn't think the consequences would be so dire. How is a maid supposed to serve anyone if they can't be allowed in the kitchen to make food?" She whirled on Berserker. "That doesn't make sense, right? It's like something that has to be illegal." Berserker was put on the spot once more, then turned to her and asked with a strained tone of voice. "What's a maid?" "A servant of sorts." Sigurd responded with a wave of his hand and a look of befuddlement on his face. Boudica could see that explanation ending only one way. Berserker blinked, then pointed a finger at his chest before he spoke again. "So, am I a maid?" She felt a headache strike her, bringing her hand up and rubbing her forehead as she did so before pulling it down. Pointing first to Berserker. No, you're not a maid. It's not the same sort of servant that we are, just someone who works for a noble or something along those lines. She turned next to the new servant. And we can introduce one another. I'm Boudica, rider class servant. The servant made a face and then nodded their head up and down. I never knew a rival such as this would exist, but it is fitting we should greet each other in such a dignified way. Juan. A smug grin appeared on their face as they placed their hands on their hips once more. I am Tamamo Cat of the Tamamo 9. Berserker servant and the greatest fox around. Sorry, did you say fox? I did. But you call yourself cat. Yep, Juan. Boudica debated whether she should ask for more information but decided against it, probably being much too troublesome. Shaking her head, she waved her hands in an effort to shoo away the bewildering conversation she had just been involved in. Anyway, if you're happy to help then I'm sure that Berserker won't mind some more assistance. She trailed off as she recalled their reaction to those of divine heritage, then turned and shot them a small look before she continued on in a searching tone of voice. There won't be a problem, right? Berserker didn't say anything, he pursed his lips and then shot her a quick look before he shook his head from side to side and gave her a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes but there was a clear attempt for it. No, I think that I shall be able to manage fine with her help. It would be wrong to tell others not to when I'm trying to bring them together. After all, thank you for your help. Aren't you nice and polite, Juan? Tamamo Cat praised with an approving nod of the head. I think that you might have the makings of a decent enough butler if you really. We're not getting into that line of thinking again. She cut right through that sentence before it could take root, silencing the follow-up by leveling Tamamo Cat with a flat look which managed to get the point across if the pout was any indication. I suppose the first thing we would need to consider is the type of festival or celebration you would need to hold in the first place. There's probably a couple close to right now but it could be anything. Unless you were aiming for something specific. Berserker glanced down, thought flooded across their face for a moment and was soon followed by dejection as they evidently failed to come up with anything. Giving a quick shrug of their shoulders, accompanied by a barely audible mumble under their breath. Not sure. Just something. Hey, that's fine. Reaching across, she spoke softly as she placed a hand on his arm in a comforting manner. He didn't react to the movement save for a short look at her before bringing his head away and facing another part of the mess hall. Just means that we have a lot of options open for us. I can already think of a couple of ideas but this was your suggestion in the first place. Besides, to my knowledge there are some holidays that are coming up which we might be able to plan around. Holidays. Berserker's immediate reaction was to parrot the word back to her with a raised eyebrow. She had to hold back a blink at the genuine confusion on his face as well was established just how much this servant actually knew, considering they didn't even appear to be aware of what a holiday was. Then again, they might not be human so there was no reason to assume that they would. Their brows scrunched together, they brought their free hand towards their chin and rubbed it with a clawed finger, a faint brushing sound as it moved along their skin before they spoke again in a slow and uncertain way. Those are special days for humans, aren't they? Where they do something. Yeah. Tamamo Cat confirmation seemed to put him at ease if the relaxation of his shoulders was any indication, though perhaps it was a little telling he was expecting to be wrong. The eyes of the animalistic servant widened and almost shone with excitement as she started to vibrate. Oh, Christmas. Christmas is coming up and that goes hand in hand with parties and feasts, Juan. This is the perfect chance to spread cheer and get back into the light after so long away. The purpose is more towards spreading cheer. Her words were barely even regarded by the servant in any way as they seemingly became lost in their own fantasies. That being said, their sudden realization did grant her some ideas. She brought her focus back to the armored berserker before her and drew her arms back to her hips. She does have a point though. Christmas is coming up and that is one of those modern holidays which is rather popular with people. Considering Master celebrated Halloween, I figure they would do the same here. Another festival of joy. Sigurd rumbled by her side, She mentally slapped herself for forgetting that he would be in a similar boat, especially when Berserker turned on the man with a look of surprise on his face, leaning forwards and tilting their head. You don't know it either. I confess that I do not know, my good fellow. Sigurd shook his head from side to side. The dejection lasted for barely a moment before the cheer flooded his words once more, his arms being spread wide. But that is no reason to exclude myself. I am happy to indulge in the joys of other cultures. It reminds me of my traveling days. His arms lowered back down as both he and Berserker turned on Boudica expectantly. A hand was brought up to her forehead as she rubbed it back and forth, not bothering to fight back the smile that was forming upon her lips. Keep in mind that this knowledge comes from the Grail. Christmas didn't exist when I was alive and it's probably changed over the years. A gathering of friends and family accompanied by the giving of presents. A faintly amused tone behind her, she turned and caught the tanned archer approaching with a steel pot in his hands, having clearly been privy to their conversation. He placed it down with a clunk as he continued to speak. Though it is supposed to celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ, I doubt there will be many servants here who know or would regard them with any degree of importance, aside from Saint Jean. He added on the name almost as an afterthought, though Boudica was sure there might be at least one or two more who would celebrate the birth of Jesus, then again she wasn't one of those. The holiday itself has become more a time of gathering. Archer continued on as he removed the lid of the pot, leaning back to avoid the steam which rose up, accompanying a faint smell of vegetables. As I said earlier, in modern times it is where one will assemble their family and friends for general merriment and to spread cheer to one another, normally by giving presents, or relying on Santa to give presents. Santa. Berserker quizzed behind her. Archer grunted once. If you would believe it, they are a figure who can move across the entire world, watches over the lives of children, and those who have behaved poorly will receive coal while those who have behaved well are treated to presents. A beat, he turned to them with a touch of a smirk. It's an incitement for young children to behave themselves, else come the time of Christmas they find themselves lacking in toys, games or whatever else they asked from Santa. A hum from Sigurd. Asked, you say? You make it sound as though they were sending him requests. Archer shrugged, placing the lid back on the pot. Some do, they assemble lists of whatever they would like to receive that year and then it will be carried off to Santa through magic. When he arrives, they will often leave milk and biscuits for him, and for the reindeer that pull his sleigh, they will leave carrots. Another pause. There is more I could say for it, but that is the simplest version. Ah, do not worry yourself about that, Archer. She turned to Sigurd, as well as the jolly tone that he now held. She saw the glimmer in his eyes as he stroked his mustache with renewed vigor. I would say that you have provided us with a much-needed idea for this plan. Though I am curious, how long until this Christmas is upon us? 3 days. Sigurd stopped moving for a short moment, then he lowered his arm to his side. The frown that he now wore was a touch more troubled. One that Boudica now shared with him. She was certain he had come to the same conclusion as her. With the length of time they had left, there wasn't a lot of planning they could have. Even without the need to sleep, 3 days to assemble a party wasn't a lot of time for them. Time means nothing to me. The words were delivered so suddenly and with such confidence that she had to blink. She turned to the speaker and saw Berserker standing tall. The uncertain posture he once had was all but banished away as he stared at them. His mismatched eyes swept over each of their faces before they landed back on the tanned archer. I am not one to concern myself with the human passage of time, not in this regard. You say this is a festival for giving and cheer. Then we shall work to see it done. Even should this Santa have been slain in the incineration of humanity, I will work to see this through. Bringing up their right hand, they pointed it down into the counter and looked dangerously close to putting their finger through it. I have made an oath to see this through to the end. Now that the path has been opened to me, I shall not turn my eyes from it. I see only the end goal and wish it realized. Drawing his arm back, he slammed his fist onto his chest around his heart, producing a weighty clap as he did so. If you would still aid me, then I would ask you to lend me your strength so that we might overcome this obstacle together. If this Christmas is to bring about bonds and cheer, then I shall make this the grandest Christmas that has ever existed. Can I call upon you for this?" Whether it was the nature of their goal or the earnest look in their eyes, perhaps even the fact it was a plea for aid, she found herself unable to speak for a few moments. When her mind finally caught up with her, she felt her lips pull themselves into a smile, her arms brought themselves up and folded over her chest as she leaned on one side. "I believe I said as much already," she said, looking him in the eyes as she did so and nodding her head once. "This is something I can definitely get behind." A glance either side of her at the others present, then back towards Berserker. "And I believe I can speak for everyone present that you will most certainly receive some help." Berserker's expression all but collapsed, whatever tension or uncertainty had been in his face vanished in a moment and was replaced with simple and pure relief. His eyes closed and a breath slowly emerged from the back of his throat. Dropping his head forwards, he all but collapsed onto the counter, and it was only his hands falling down and catching him that prevented his complete fall. "That means more to me than you could possibly imagine, sister." Wait, what did you just? The immediate notion of thanking him was washed away when it registered with her what he had just called her, needing a double take and repeating the sentence in her mind again and again to ensure she had heard correctly. Her brows scrunched up before she opened and closed her mouth. Eventually, she let out a breath of her own and brought up her hands, rubbing at her eyes. "You can just call me Boudica, you know. All humans are my brothers and sisters." Berserker replied matter-of-factly, regardless of era and location. "I can't not refer to them as such, it would be a disservice." Suddenly his worry about bonds made an awful lot of sense. Still, that was something that had hit her right out of nowhere. He made it sound so natural when he said it as well. As long as he wasn't being snide or malicious, then she supposed she would let it slide for the time being, especially if he didn't seem to know any better. There was still something about him that was decidedly inhuman, at the end of the day. Her thoughts were interrupted by the clearing of a throat. Sigurd lowering his hand from in front of his lips, she saw the ghost of a smile on his face, and glancing to those around him. "So then, when should we start?" That was the real question. As soon as possible seemed to be the best answer she would be able to give. Something that Berserker looked just about ready to answer with before they paused, their eyes turned unfocused and their body locked up. Clear surprise wrote itself over his features, and for a moment, she found herself a little concerned at the reaction. Then he whirled around at speeds that, even to her, looked like little more than a jump from one place to another, his eyes fixed firmly on the entrance of the cafeteria. Her interest piqued, she leaned over the counter and turned her head towards the still closed door, inclining an eyebrow at it. She could sense servants approaching if she really focused on it, but she couldn't make out all that much of what, or who, was actually approaching. Yet for the sudden reaction of Berserker, she was left to assume it might have been a god based on the way they froze up. She soon realized she wasn't alone. A swift glance to either side revealed that the others had similarly noticed the surprise on Berserker and were now all looking in the exact same direction with varying degrees of apprehensive curiosity. She looked back at the door and squinted at it almost expectantly. A hiss of metal. The door opened up and a figure stepped into the room. What struck her immediately was the facial similarity to Nero, and that was where it ended. First and foremost was the raw power that the servant was exuding just by being in the room, with a faint similarity to Berserker to the point she would have thought there was a connection. Clad in blackened plate metal with a matching skirt down to their ankles, their strides were accompanied by the clanking of steel. "What the?" She heard the faint whisper at her side. She turned and the sight that greeted her was very much not one she had been expecting. Archer, who usually looked unflappable, was wearing an expression of pure shock on his face, eyes wide as saucers and lips parted. He'd gone ramrod straight and kept his arms down, his gaze unblinking as he tracked the approaching servant into the cafeteria, not even making much more of a single sound beyond his initial surprise. She doubted he even caught her staring. Bringing her focus back to the servant as they marched, there was something about them which almost resonated with her. The same sort of feeling she got when she was around Gareth, as though there was something that connected the two of them. The pale golden eyes of the servant swept over the cafeteria before landing on her and the audience that were transfixed by her appearance. There wasn't an ounce of emotion on her face as she stared right back at them. Then her eyes narrowed just a touch in what might have been interest before they returned to their similar disinterest, something that perhaps might have been the end. Had Berserker not called out a moment later, "Artoria, I didn't know you could shrink as well." Dead silence. The head of the now-named Artoria mechanically turned towards the speaker, as did Boudica's own attention shift towards Berserker, who looked the picture of innocent curiosity, looking right at the newly arrived servant with what could only be described as pure joy, though it quickly started to fade away without a reason as they then bit their lip and glanced to the side. "Ah, no, wait," they mumbled out under their breath before waving their hand from side to side. Forget I ever said anything. We've probably not met one another before. Not in this incarnation, yet you were brazen enough to speak with me in such a manner." Boudica snapped her head back. Artoria was now a few feet from her and standing before the counter, her attention divided between the kitchens and the Berserker. "I would accuse you of encountering another version of myself, were it not for the peculiarity of your words. Had you been aware of me, you would know that my appearance did not change during my life as king." "It didn't." Berserker went back to sounding confused now. She watched as their brows furrowed a bit, bringing up their right hand and scratching the side of their temple. "But the you I met rode a horse and everything. Do you still have the spear?" Another pause before they cringed rather heavily and made a series of noises. Actually, it would be best if everyone just forgot I said that." Artoria's expression had barely shifted, yet something seemed to pass through those pale golden eyes for a brief second before it vanished. "You do not look surprised by my appearance. Most would hold a different expectation for King Arthur. Are you supposed to look different? You're still wearing black armor, you're only a little shorter than I remember. Do you not have the horse anymore? You went everywhere. Just ignore me. Refrain from embarrassing yourself in such a manner. Either speak what you mean or stay your tongue." Boudica frowned for a moment at the blunt manner of speaking, watching as Artoria seemingly had little else to say on the matter as she turned to Archer and looked him dead in the eyes. She wasn't entirely certain what was happening, and it felt as though she'd somehow walked into two separate conversations without context for either. "Saber." Archer greeted with a cordial tone of voice, nodding his head once as he did so, having recovered himself from his earlier stupor. "Archer." Artoria replied, then leaned forwards. A shower of blue light and the armor peeled away from her body. The undercoat black dress remained in place with the long sleeves. "If you are to be granted leave to work in the kitchens, I shall assume you have some degree of competence in the art of food preparation." "I mingle, yes. HMPH. A hamburger. Excuse me." Boudica nearly laughed at the expression that Archer now wore. Instead she brought up her hand and covered her mouth, pretending as though she was deep in thought and shooting a quick look towards the direction of Sigward. The man was making less of an effort to hide his amusement, rolling his lips inwards and fighting back his laughter, the trembling of his shoulders giving him away. "Are you hard of hearing?" "You, what?" Archer's expression cycled through several emotions before it landed on shock, bringing up his hand and pointing a finger at her. "You want me," he then pointed at himself, "to make you a hamburger? You make a sensible point. A single hamburger is far too lacking for me," Artoria remarked with the same emotionless voice she held since she started speaking, then gave a single nod of the head. "Make it a double hamburger, extra cheese, and don't forget the pickles. Potato fries as well." The heads turned to the speaker. Berserker looked around at the faces and only tilted his head and shrugged. "What? I think the fried potatoes go well with burgers." "Good. Someone with taste." Artoria praised, and Boudica was still finding herself mentally stumbling around as she tried to make sense of what was happening around her, all while Berserker preened at the praise and nodded his head up and down as though he had managed to do some grand good. "Do you expect me to repeat myself, Archer?" It might have been a question, but it was phrased as a warning. She clearly wasn't going to ask twice, and it had been apparent what she wanted. Boudica stared at her for a moment longer as she finally managed to make sense of what was happening and then gradually shifted her focus from Artoria to Archer. The tanned man still stood with his hand still pressed against his chest from where he had pointed earlier. He blinked a single time, then let out a sudden breath that was very near a cough as he turned away from Artoria and started to shake his head from side to side, repeating the words, "A double hamburger," under his breath as he did so. The shock still clearly audible in his tone of voice. As amusing as that was, it was still a rather shocking turn of events to see the Archer reduced to such a state with what was probably a fairly ordinary order of food. He hadn't reacted quite that strongly when Berserker made a similar order, yet the moment Artoria did so, suddenly he was acting like the sky turned pink or something. Quietly humming, she turned her eyes back to those in front of her and noticed immediately the look in Berserker's eyes, flickering between her and Artoria, who had assumed a spot next to him, having pushed her way between the two Berserker servants and sat herself down without a care in the world. Moments passed, then Berserker cleared his throat as he brought his focus to Artoria completely. More silence. Artoria spoke with a curt tone of voice. "Should you wish to speak with me, then I urge you to do so quickly." They sounded neither rude nor annoyed, but there was an underlying sense of urgency in her words. Berserker winced for a moment and then nodded his head up and down, seemingly agreeing with her. "Yes, you're right, as usual." She very nearly missed that last part. "We are starting to think of something to do for Christmas and I wished to ask if you would also like to lend your aid to this cause." Boudica raised her brows just a touch. Given how uneasy he had been about asking for help earlier, he was now virtually jumping at the chance of asking the literal first servant who walked into the room. Well, he did seem to claw back some confidence which peeled away a bit the moment he started speaking with Artoria. Really, she was just a little curious as to what was happening. "No, I am telling you what shall happen." Berserker changed his tone a moment later, raising himself up as it were and looking down at the saber servant. "Myself and my siblings, with the aid of others, are going to create the grandest Christmas to ever exist on the face of this world. Whether you provide help or not, it will go forward. I am offering you a chance to be a part of that." Artoria said nothing, not immediately. Instead they seemingly stilled the moment Berserker had stopped speaking. Then turned their head nearly mechanically towards them while their eyes betrayed nothing. Looking up to the servant with an unblinking gaze which turned rather intense, without even being directed at her. Neither of the servants broke eye contact with the other. "Oh." A low noise of interest from Artoria. "You seem confident enough to make such boasts. Still, that you shall ask me, this means you are prepared to pay stipulations for my assistance." Pale eyes narrowed. A king does not so freely lend their aid to all who come asking. It was Berserker's turn to narrow his eyes. "Stipulations. You would ask for something in exchange for your aid, yes. I am asking you for something, you should ask me for something. That is a fair exchange between us," they concluded with an accepting nod of the head. "What would you demand in return?" "There is a matter of Chaldea's repeated triumphs over me that has incurred a scratch upon my pride as a king." They sounded almost dismissive, yet Boudica noticed the brief fire move through their eyes. "As such, I would not lower myself to a background role in this plan of yours. Traditionally there is a role that is at the forefront of Christmas. I shall assume that." Berserker blinked once, then tilted his head and spoke in a bemused tone of voice. "You want to be Jesus. .. Boudica brought her hand up and rubbed her brows. Before this was over they could probably do with more help. And there might be another they could ask. "I know the holiday, yes." His tone betrayed nothing, neither did his eyes. It was almost eerie the lack of emotion she could see in his face and hear in his words. All the same, he stood in the doorway with his arms folded over his chest. "You are planning something for it." The declaration was met with a nod of the head. It was hardly as though it wasn't the obvious reason for asking someone about Christmas. Ash turned away from her, unfolding his arms and placing his hand against the doorway to lean against. His lips pulled downwards as he spoke. "Had you asked me before, there would have been a time when I would have dismissed it entirely. Told you to focus your efforts elsewhere and to leave the matter be, I very likely would have believed this effort foolish and then wished no part in what you were doing. Her face softened as she listened to them. I'm only asking because I would like you to be there and I'm sure others would be more than happy to as well. You're asking on behalf of Sigurd. She winced. That obvious? Ash's lips pulled upwards into a thin smile. Maybe, but I know Sigurd enough that he would not allow something like my previous actions to sour his opinion of me. The smile vanished as he turned back to her and looked down. He has asked often, has he? I know he made a single attempt to meet with me which I rebuffed. You don't need to sound ashamed of that. Her hand came up to reassure him. I'm not going to pretend to understand what you are still going through, but I know that you need your space. It's why I'm saying you don't have to help us with this, but it would mean a lot if you could show up just for a little while. A faint grunt from him and a nod of the head. I imagine that seeing me walking around would put his nerves to rest. If nothing else, it would be better that he knows rather than to leave him in uncertainty. He does not know you have come to me, does he? I told him and the others I was going to find more help that would keep it a secret, but I didn't specify. A lopsided smile made its way onto her face. A half shrug soon followed as he remained stone-faced at her actions. She kept quiet that she didn't want to get his hopes up. Sigurd really did care about Ash and thought of him as a friend, but she wasn't about to make excuses for things she didn't know about. I will help you, he declared rather suddenly, briefly surprising her with how easily he accepted the role, though he followed through a moment later. It is a human holiday, so it is right that humans celebrate it. I have vague recollections of what is supposed to occur if you should need ideas on what best to do. But I won't make assumptions. Boudica let out a faint breath, her expression softened and the smile on her lips became a touch wider. Thank you, really. And it's not just a holiday for people. It's for everyone to celebrate, including you. Bringing up her hand, she pressed a finger into his chest. I know you aren't the most festive, but just remember that. I cannot forget. Ash replied with a vague tone of voice, then shook his head from side to side. I would suggest the simulator, but that would be easily detected by any with sense, if hiding the party was your goal. We haven't got a lot of time either. Boudica winced. We managed to get the help of King Arthur, but some of her demands were a bit odd, and Berserker folded to them almost instantly. She added as an afterthought, not all that bothered in the grand scheme of things. I have a rough plan to provide you with the venue you require. His words were delivered slowly and with a noticeable bit of apprehension. I will speak with Romani Archaman and return to you with news. In the meantime, I'd make ready plans to make your venue portable. Boudica blinked. Portable. The location known as Lapland is important for Christmas, Ash explained with a bit of strain, as though he was focusing rather hard on something with a slight crinkle of his brows. And I believe it would hold more weight if it were held there. But without a singularity, we cannot arrive in that location, but I have other ideas around that. Tell me the room you are all planning in, I shall meet with you later. Almost weekly Santa altar. Snow and ice blanketed the ground as far as the eye could see, only intermittent with the presence of the occasional tree which broke up the horizon of nothing, yet to the north there lay a wall of green. Towering in the distance were the barren trunks of frosted wood, resting at the summit where sharp leaves pointed like spears. A touch of wind blew through, carrying a thin mist along the surface of the ground. A beat of silence as the world fell silent for all to hear, if there had been any at all. Then the silence shattered, a flash of light as a pillar ripped up through the ground with a screech. From the light a figure tumbled forwards and directly into the snow, dropping onto their hands and knees as they did so, labored breathing echoing out just above the wind accompanied by a short series of coughs. Maroon-red fabric coated a sheet of chainmail, embroidered patterns ran down the front from the collar to the waist, curved steel molded to the body with grooves running across its face was strapped to the left shoulder. To the right was a smaller series of shield-shaped plates that ran down the course of the arm, approaching the elbow. On the end of either hands were thick steel gauntlets strapped over old brown leather gloves. The owner pulled them from the snow and rested them on their lap for a moment. The helmet that covered the head turned left and right, A sharp row of spikes shaped into a crown sat atop the helm before the hands moved up, clasping the side and pulling upwards. Matty blonde hair and piercing green eyes swept over the landscape. The helm's body crumbled, turning to dust and flowing back into the man, as though it became one with their body. The only sound to be made next was when their body rose up, the creak of leather and the clang of moving steel followed by the crunch of snow as they adjusted their footing. From behind them billowed a black cape, pulled from another set and draped across their shoulders. Even if they had changed the armor from the last instance, this remained with them. It was something that was demanded last time and he knew not why he allowed it to remain. Only that it did. They looked left and right, rolling their shoulders and then moving their hand towards their pocket, pulling forth a disc of shiny metal and pressing a glowing button on its skin. Light burst upwards, crackling for a moment before forming a paper-thin sheet of blue which swiftly took the form of a face. "I've arrived within the land without incident." Ash spoke, keeping his words short as he surveyed his location. "By all accounts, there has been little to concern my coming here beyond a faint strain on my person but little else." "What of your end?" Silence. "Romani." The doctor blinked as he was quizzed again, jumping in his chair before letting out a small noise, bringing his hand up to rub his head. "Sorry, just still getting over it. I mean, we need to use ray shifting and even then we need a singularity and you can just appear in this location just by focusing really hard and cracking one of those summoning stones. It feels a bit strange." Ash remained silent, not sure of what he could say. "But your readings look a little on edge, but that's not surprising. The moment you arrived we picked it up on the sensors as a micro-singularity. It's stable for the moment." Romani trailed off, showing another flare of discomfort before shaking his head. "Still getting around this is all. Sorry. I don't consider it something to apologize over." The hum from the man didn't sound as though he was convinced and Ash dismissed it as a difference of opinion, putting it to the side. Then again, this was a singularity he had gone out of his way to create just through his arrival. As expected, it had worked out and it had been formed. All they needed to do now was start bringing the other servants down and then work could begin in earnest. "Well, we should be able to make use of the Lord Vessel summoning and send servants down in the same way that we sent down Leonidas to the Scandinavian singularity." A beat before the doctor frowned. "Those without independent action are gonna be hit rough by it. Probably the same sort of cost to it without a proper master, human strength or thereabouts, which is pretty debilitating for a servant, but we're not aiming for a fight. Not if he could help it, no. I can give you some time to put out some distance from your current location. Then if all else goes according to plan, the others should be alerted and then Saber can take them out on the plan you've all prepared for them." Another bout of silence. The doctor's frown deepened a touch and concern seeped into his eyes. "Though I have to say," he shook his head from side to side, silencing the doctor before he could get another word out. Already knowing what they were likely to say, and it was by no means the fault of Romani what would happen next. "With or without your permission, this would have occurred. This way there is some semblance of control over what will occur and you can be alerted to unexpected variables. Besides, traveling to the acclaimed home of Santa during the time of Christmas will likely mean more than a festival in the simulator. And it would allow his nature to actually benefit those he was sworn to, even if he didn't understand. He knew that this would play out in a way that would make Ritska and Olga happy in the end. For whatever discomfort he felt in participating, he was put at ease by that thought alone." Romani remained silent, then shrugged his shoulders and brought his hands up. "If you say so. Once Fujimaru-kun and the director are down, then we can start getting to work on getting the others down discreetly. Pharaoh said she has a way of keeping Leo out of the loop long enough for me to get all the servants down for help. It'll be up to the rest of you from there if you really want this to be a surprise." He nodded his head, then paused for a moment to furrow his brows. "You are certain that Leonardo would be unable to attend as well?" A wry chuckle was his response. Not without tipping her off that there was something going on. "Besides, Leo knows pretty well that I'm a little against the idea of sending her down on ray shifts with Fujimaru-kun." Bringing his hand up, he scratched the side of his neck and offered an apologetic look. It's come back to bite us now because if I suddenly change my mind. Ash understood. Leonardo was no fool and she would almost certainly come to the conclusion that something had spurred Romani's decision and that would ultimately lead to the problem of Berserker's efforts being uncovered. Much to the servant's sadness when that was revealed to him, but he opted to provide a gift to Vinci when they returned to commemorate the occasion. In that case, I shall begin my trek of this land and discover the extent of the Singularities' influence. If any creatures have started to slip through the gaps into this small location, I can do my best to thin the herd before they approach Ritska and the others. He declared, giving a single look to his surroundings and then turning his eyes back to Romani. Until we speak again, pass along my words to Berserker and the others. Romani nodded. Will do, and Ash. A flicker of hesitation, then a gentle smile. Thank you for helping to do this for them. Even if it might get us to catch hell, I think it's a really good thing you're doing. He stared, then thinned his lips and grunted once as he turned the communicator off, returning it to its place in his pocket. Even if Romani were to provide him with those words, they meant next to nothing within his heart. He did not feel as though he was doing a good thing, but he knew that he should have been. Closing his eyes, he took in a deep breath and then let out a long sigh before opening his eyes once more. Whether he felt it or not, this would be a good thing for Ritska and Olga. It had to be. With those thoughts in his mind, he started his trek forwards, and wading through the snow, he would need to find a good location for Berserker and the others to start setting up when they arrived. Establishing a summoning point for them with the stones and then allowing for transport to and from the Singularity to the best of their abilities. He was already using his bottomless box to carry the supplies they had pre-prepared. All that remained was to assemble everything and hope they had enough time for it. He supposed the biggest danger was stray servants. They normally appeared in micro-singularities the longer they went on. Unless he could convince them to avoid causing trouble. Ash shook his head. A problem for another time. For now, he needed to focus on finding the perfect location to set up camp. Goo. That was the eloquent response that escaped his lips as a sudden knock rang through his head, the metallic drumming forcibly dragging him from his sleep, his eyes snapping open and his hands already moving towards his face, his palms rubbed over his eyes as his lips parted and a yawn escaped him. He could remember a time when he might have been more excited about today, where he would have instantly rushed out of bed before anyone got to him, or where he would have stayed awake all night before just in case he accidentally missed Santa. Something he always ended up doing, but still, it was something that he would do. Now though, he'd almost forgotten until Mash reminded him it was Christmas Eve yesterday. Another knock at the door. He let out a low groan as he started to pull himself upwards. The door hissed from across the room and he thought for a moment whoever had been knocking instead just opened the door. He dragged his eyes down his face and turned towards the doorway only to find himself blinking in surprise as he found himself staring at someone's back rather than their front, looming through the doorway and speaking a moment later. If this is not of the highest importance, then I shall be displeased. He requires his rest, that which he has been lacking lately. His hands rubbed his eyes again to try and make sense of what he was seeing, and sure enough, he couldn't understand it the second time around. If there is a message, relay it to me and I shall pass it along when he has awoken. Not before. He wasn't sure whether the silence was because he was shocked or the person on the other side of the door was shocked. Either way, the silence now pervaded through the room and he was most certainly awake now, shooting up in his bed and gluing his eyes to the back of the silver mane of hair that stood in the doorway. Gradually, his eyes peeled away and towards the shape he saw next to his bed, and understanding started to blossom in his mind. Directly next to his bed, close to his head, was a simple wooden chair, positioned in such a way that the one sitting down would be able to look directly at his face. His eyes shifted back to the individuals in question and he found himself unable to speak. Not sure of what he was supposed to even begin saying. Gwendolyn San. The bewildered voice of Mash came from directly in front of the person in question, the god being in the doorway and blocking all sight in or out of the room by being positioned in there. Why are you? This is Senpai's room though. I am aware of the room. Gwendolyn didn't miss a single beat and spoke with utter confidence. And the occupant, whom you have likely disturbed from a welcome rest after his long hours of work. A reason for which I have yet to be provided with. Speak quickly, else I shall merely deposit you elsewhere in the facility for another time." He sounded serious as well. "It's, Mash didn't sound as though she knew how to respond to that, pulling him from his awe at the situation and quickly shaking his head from side to side before speaking up. "I'm awake now," he called out, dragging the attention of the duo towards him. Gwendolyn turned to the side and Mash pulled her eyes from the god and towards him, offering a smile of greeting as she did so. "Something the matter, Mash?" She looked between Gwendolyn and himself several times before clearing her throat. "The director sent me to get you," she said. "There was something concerning being seen in Chaldeas which might be evidence of a minute singularity. She wanted us to get ready to investigate it." There was a brief pause, then her expression turned apologetic as her next words were delivered with a note of hesitation. "Merry Christmas, by the way, Senpai." A snort escaped him, his hands rubbed at his forehead once more, a smile formed on his lips and he nodded back to the girl. "Merry Christmas to you too, Mash, you as well, Gwendolyn. I shall assume this is some manner of human holiday," was the reply from the god in question, though he was a little caught off guard by the words which soon followed. "Thus, I shall participate. Merry Christmas to you as well, Ritska." His hands came down, he stared at Gwendolyn for a moment in surprise. With the lack of the sun-like helm, the expression of the god was on full display, a ghost of a smile on their lips and a faint hint of warmth in their eyes as they stared back at him. Something almost unearthly about their expression which nearly had him blush at them, though he managed to control himself at the last moment, clearing his throat as he did so. "I'll head up to the command room in a second, Mash, just need to get changed." He swept his legs over the side of the bed as he did so and onto the floor. A beat, the girl nodded, but her eyes remained on Gwendolyn, who didn't seem as though they were actually going to move. Ritska cleared his throat once again. "I'm getting changed," Gwendolyn hummed. "I heard you the first time." His expression strained. Which is something I normally do alone. Are you ashamed of your body? No, but then there is nothing to worry yourself with. As if on cue, the snake feet rose up and turned to him as one as Gwendolyn flourished an arm towards them. "Nothing you show me can ever be as physically deformed as this. Thus you have no reason to hide yourself from me." The smile they offered was almost beautiful, were it not for the mildly troubling problems associated with it. "I am fine with you changing. I'd still rather be alone." Gwendolyn was silent for a moment, their expression looked dangerously close to falling for a moment, yet it was held back. A sharp intake of breath and a sigh later, they nodded their head and closed their eyes. "Very well. Then I shall ensure you are greeted with privacy in this matter." They started to move towards the wardrobe a moment later. The confusion Ritska felt lasted until they gripped the handles and swung them aside, revealing the contents to the world, and for Ritska, it felt like he was going through some sort of roller coaster ride of emotion as he found himself staring at the unashamed face of Kiyohime within the wardrobe, in between his shirts and trousers. Ritska opened his mouth, then promptly closed it again as he opted against speaking. Gwendolyn made a noise as they snapped their fingers. Kiyohime was bound in bright golden chains a moment later, making a small noise as she toppled forwards, and was only spared by Gwendolyn grabbing the back of the chains as he stepped aside, keeping her dangling in the air as he did so, showing an utter lack of chair as he stared to move once more, dragging Kiyohime behind him as he did so, ignoring her struggling. "Wait, this is a chance." The berserker all but begged as she was pulled along. "Besides, I was only there because you snuck into his room in the middle of the night. I was making sure you weren't making moves on a sleeping Anshin-sama. You got to stare at his peaceful face all night. This isn't fair." Her arguments died away as the pair moved past Mash and disappeared down the hallway, their volume fading away into the distance as they moved further and further away. Mash was rapidly glancing between the two locations with wide eyes, opening and closing her mouth several times as she did so. "Wah, I'm just not gonna question it anymore," he declared to her with a shrug. For whatever reason, he wasn't all that bothered by this sort of thing anymore. It probably said a lot more about his newfound tolerance than anything else. See you in a moment, Mash. She looked like she wanted to say a little more but somehow managed to hold herself back, perhaps because she was still shocked at the turn of events which came from rather out of left field, in his own opinion at least. Nodding to him, she stepped back and let the door close once more. Happy holidays, huh? He grumbled to himself as he pushed his way out of bed. Merry Christmas, Director. He greeted the woman the moment he stepped into the command room. She looked over her shoulder towards him and blinked twice before making a small noise and nodding her head back to him. Yes. Merry Christmas. Clearing her throat, she stepped back from the monitor she had been leaning over and turned to face himself and Mash, folding her arms over her chest as she did so. A little bit of surprise on her face faded away, replaced by her usual business-like expression. Though the merriment of holidays will have to wait for the time being. Romani detected a minute singularity in the early hours of the morning, one that he assumed would have disappeared within the span of an hour, and has shown signs of stabling. He placed his hands on his hips. So that means that something is keeping it active. Correct. A frown formed on her lips. The location is coincidental enough that it warrants further investigation. Regardless of all of that, we will need to determine its impact and how it has formed into a singularity in the first place. Especially given that it occupies a location far enough away from any human settlement of the time and extends over a range of 10 miles squared. Considering he wasn't all that good when it came to geography, he couldn't really tell if that was large or small. 10 miles sounded pretty big, but she made it sound so small. Then again, he could make out the gist of what she was saying. So it's somehow stable despite not really looking like it's a threat to human history. I thought that those ones were supposed to fizzle out or something. They normally would, Senpai. Mash said. He looked at her as she continued on. This sort of situation means that there is something inside of the singularity that is keeping it active. Like a Holy Grail. All of the Holy Grails are accounted for and are now under heaviest guard. The director spoke before he could ask the obvious question. If the cause is the presence of a Holy Grail, then it is not one that we possess, and there has been little evidence of any servants somehow being able to depart Chaldea since that last incident. That was reassuring, at least. Clearing his throat, he raised his right hand slightly. So where is the singularity anyway? You said something that the location was weird. A tiny wince from the director. She turned and looked down at the monitor and towards the doctor who was still sitting down there. He saw the look the man shot back towards her, coupled with the shrug of the shoulders before silently turning around, giving him a wave as he did so. With a sigh, the woman brought her hand up and placed it on her forehead, rubbing her fingers along it. The location of the singularity is within Finland during the 8th century, more specifically, it's located in the territory which will become known as Lapland. Lapland. He blinked twice, then an additional time as the name bounced around in his head. His lips rolled inwards as he suppressed the wheeze that was building up in the back of his throat, raising a single finger and then speaking, his voice wavering with amusement. Lapland. The director nodded her head. Yes, Lapland. There's a singularity, in Lapland, on Christmas Day. Yes. And it's far enough away from people that we can't figure out what the problem is. I have explained as much. There was only one logical conclusion that he could come up with as to why this was going to be a thing. Lowering the hand, he folded his arms over his chest and gave a single confident nod of the head. Mash, I know what the problem is. He felt her turn to him with surprise. A quick glance showed her eyes were wide with surprise. You do, Senpai? Yes, he declared, his voice cracking once again as he tried to fight back the laughter. We were, SNRK, we're going to save Santa. He closed his eyes the moment he finished speaking, wheezing to himself and slapping hand over his face. His body folded over as he staggered away, still laughing as he did so. Maybe it wasn't all that funny, but it was something that lightened his mood at any rate. The joke was there and he had to make it. The bout of laughter went on for a little while before he was able to calm himself down, though the moment he did he almost sent himself back into a string of giggles, namely because he brought his head back up and saw the face that the director was giving him. It wasn't anger, just flat disappointment. It was rather funny with her half-lidded eyes and thinned lips, as though he went for the low-hanging fruit she expected him to. Her foot tapping on the floor finally cut it out with a final cough. His fist was placed in front of his mouth, coughing into and clearing his throat, regaining his composure as he did so and letting out a faint breath. Smacking his lips twice, he waved a hand to the room and tapped himself on the chest. Okay, yeah, I got that out of my system. The director maintained her look before she grunted. At least you are able to maintain your high spirits. Though I would encourage you to practice your professionalism in keeping the jokes to the right time and place. Though it goes without saying that you shall obviously not be heading down in a singularity to save Santa. The fact she cringed at her own words nearly did him in again, though he stopped it with another cough and a nod of the head. The director was probably right, but it was something to make him feel better. Joking aside, do we actually have any information or something on what's going down there? Romani swirled around in his chair with a troubled look. To be honest, I'm inclined to say the entire area. From the looks of things, there isn't a single point of the singularity that you can say is the problem location. It's more like the entire singularity is the origin itself. Ah, so it's going to be one of those types of missions then. He replied to the man, looking to Mash and seeing her similarly troubled by the news or lack thereof. Well, heading to Lapland on Christmas Day has to count for something at least. Might even be considered prophetic. Bringing up a thumb, he placed it against his chest. I'm just hoping I run into Santa Claus. When else am I gonna get a chance like that? The director sent him a look as though to silently question whether he was serious. He certainly was now. If he had doubted Santa before then he didn't anymore. If Halloween was actually about magical monsters crossing over from some underworld then he was now 100% inclined to believe that there was such a thing as a magic man delivering presents to everyone on Christmas Day over the span of a single night. I'm certain you are aware of the futility of that goal, was the director's reply, placing her hands on her hips, raising a single eyebrow at him as she did so. There is little evidence to substantiate the claim that there is an entity that behaves as Santa does. More than likely they are an amalgamation of different cultural icons formed around the image of the Christian Saint Nicholas. You could just say you don't believe in Santa, he pointed out, to which she sent him another look. Though I'm a little surprised at that, director. I would have thought people who did actual magic would be a little more accepting of Santa. She gaped at that. Wow, that is completely and utterly. She trailed off, closing her eyes and bringing a hand up to nurse her forehead once more. There is a marked difference between magecraft and the feats Santa would be capable. Within the age of gods, I would be almost certain he could have existed, but certainly not within the modern day. He wet his lips. So what you're saying is, there's a chance Santa was real a long time ago. Really? Now Mash sounded rather excited, her eyes lit up as her lips parted. That's right. The age of gods would have been the best time for Santa Claus to exist. Mysteries were stronger back then, so teleporting around the planet and ensuring there were enough presents for all the children would be something they could achieve. In fact, it is heavily implied that Santa Claus was initially inspired by Odin. Waving a hand towards Mash, he sent a challenging look to the director, the hidden message of, your move, passing along between the two of them. He could see Romani fighting back smiles behind her, slowly turning his chair around as his shoulders trembled up and down. The director's face went a rather interesting shade of red after that, her eyes narrowed and she opened her mouth to speak, raising a single finger before she lowered it down and clenched her jaw. There is no Santa. What amusing words. A presence flooded the room behind him. He caught the moment the previously frustrated Olga's expression turned as white as her hair, but that meant nothing when he recalled the voice and whirled around to face whoever had spoken. Light faded away as their body solidified. Whatever he had to say died the moment he saw them. Would you make them again after seeing me, I wonder? The altered Artoria asked with a tinge of challenge to them, a trace of a smirk on her lips as she leaned on one side, pale yellow eyes flickering up and down the director behind him. Or are you the type of fool who would deny evidence even when it stands before you? A scoff from Artoria. No Santa, you say? She stepped backwards, bringing her hands up and gesturing to herself as she did so. What then, would you call me, mage? He'd have called her Santa Claus without a second thought. It was indeed King Arthur that he had fought in the past, twice now, but there was something about this that was jarring. He couldn't even begin to wrap his mind around what was standing before him, no matter how much he wanted to. A simple black dress covering her body with a red and green bow tie around her collar, a black cape with fur lining and a velvet inside hung around her shoulders, thigh-high boots with red heels and the same white fur around the top of them, and topping it all off was the big furry Santa hat in the same black color scheme as the red of her attire. She reached down, black gloves with red palms and large rounded cuffs on either hand, and took hold of what she had placed on the floor as she left astral form. It was a large white bag with the imprints of shapes poking through it, lifting the heavy-looking bag up without even showing a hint of strain and slinging it over her shoulders. Artoria's pale eyes moved from the director and then to him. With a piercing stare, she spoke in a tone of voice that demanded an answer. I ask of you, do you believe in Santa? Yep. The answer clearly pleased her if the touch of a smile was any indication, but it lasted so short a span of time that he wasn't even sure if he imagined it or not. Her cool features swept over the room as she took a single step and started to pace back and forth. I could sense the grief that troubled the homeland of Santa. Her voice echoed through the room, not a single person made a sound. Obviously, when such a time occurs, it is natural that Santa would be summoned to render aid unto it. I have stepped in to fulfill this role, and naturally, you shall help me. After all, it is common knowledge that Santa is granted aid with helpers. There was a blur of movement and then something hit him in the face and blacked out his vision. His hands scrambled up to take hold of whatever it was and then pull it away. With a noise of surprise he dragged it in front of himself. His brows crinkled as he stared at the brown color and then started to turn it. The feeling of soft cotton was noted as he turned it until it felt as though it was the right side up. Then it dropped down to the ground, held up only by the shoulders he gripped it by. It was a reindeer onesie. He almost laughed then and there, lowering it down and opening his mouth to speak. Then he cut himself off as he saw the look in the eyes of Santa Artoria, Santoria, and saw only a single universal truth. She was being absolutely serious. She fully expected him to put on this onesie and wear it. This time, the smirk she wore wasn't imagined in the least. His eyes dragged themselves between the onesie and her several times before he asked the important question. Will it keep me warm? Are you stupid? Santoria shot back at him with a blank look. Do you think Santa would take such little care of his reindeer? That was probably going to be a yes for his question. It was good enough for him, folding the reindeer outfit over his arm and looking back to her, only to blink as she held something out towards him, a small red orb which was just large enough to cover his nose. Be honored, master. I am promoting you to Rudolph. Does it glow? Yes. All right then, thank you very much. He didn't even try to fight back the smile as he took the red nose from the hand of Santoria and stared at it. A bubble of laughter in the back of his throat was cut off by someone clearing their throat behind him. Turning around, he looked into the eyes of the director as she was silently screaming at him through her eyes, likely asking what he was playing at. What? He shrugged his shoulders once. I'm going to Lapland with Santa. I've got a Mystic Code reindeer onesie with a nose that is said to light up. I'm not going to let this chance slip through my fingers. Olga's eyes just bulged at him, opening and closing her mouth several times before she finally looked past him towards the direction of Santoria and pointed a single finger towards her. This is too coincidental. She is definitely involved with it in some way. How did you do? You should cease your drivel, elf. I have no part in the creation of the singularity. The brutal interruption from Santoria was without emotion. At the same time it meant Ritska nearly missed what she had just called the director. The woman in question clearly didn't, as she looked as though she had been slapped, making a hacking noise before speaking again. What did you just call me? Did I stutter? With another swipe of movement, something shot across the room and directly into the face of the director. He leaned back to avoid it and then promptly felt his breath get caught in his throat as he recognized the shape. His eyes widened and he snapped his jaw shut with an audible click, watching as the director fumbled through the attire on herself before pulling it away with a gasp. She held the outfit in front of her, button-up green coat, red and white striped tights and pointy green shoes. Not to mention the upwards pointing hat which matched the coat as well. It was, without a doubt, the most in-your-face elf outfit he had ever seen in his life, and the demand was rather obvious. Olga's face went bright red, and the fact he couldn't see steam flying out of her ears was a true testament to her patience and ability. If he was being honest, she looked at the outfit as though she was going to try and immolate it with her eyes, then she whirled on Santoria with the exact same expression on her face as she opened her mouth. If you think you can just make me wear something as utterly stupid as this, then you're out of your damn mind. I will not be seen walking the facility looking like some manner of clown. Santoria just stared at her in silence. Then her eyes narrowed. Is that so? Absolutely. In fact, I demand to know what you're even doing in that outfit in the first place. This is clearly some sort of mad scheme like that fiasco Nero came up with. Is she behind this one as well? Put on the uniform, elf. I'm doing no such thing, and stop calling me elf. Is that your final say on the matter? It's my first and final say on the matter. The ceiling looked rather interesting, all things considered. He'd never seen it look quite so cleaned in his life. He wondered how that had happened. Did they have someone come around with a cloth and a bucket and just wipe down the ceiling or something? Then again, he imagined they wouldn't have to put up with cobwebs at least. They were probably really on top of that thing here in Chaldea. Was he missing cobwebs all of a sudden? That would be strange. This uniform is strangely comfortable, senpai. Mash exclaimed with clear enthusiasm that he almost looked down, but he managed to save himself at the last second. He could still feel the burning glare in the side of his head, the clear warning that if he stopped staring at the ceiling, there would be consequences. I'm not sure how to explain it, but I'm feeling absolutely overwhelmed with energy right now. That's great, Mash. He replied to her. He meant it too. He was glad she was having fun like that, and his private thoughts as to how Santoria managed to get outfits which fit him and Mash perfectly were put to the side. He assumed she would have gone to Da Vinci or something, especially if they were mystic codes of a sort. I feel pretty good as well. Like I'm all tingly inside. HMPH. It is clear that you have started to feel the effects of the Christmas spirit. Santoria declared with absolute confidence. It shall serve you well once we arrive. Only those who are brimming with the spirit of Christmas shall demonstrate the greatest of abilities once we arrive. I shall not suffer naysayers, and stop staring at the ceiling. What use is a reindeer if their eyes are not on the front? As much as he would have liked to, mainly because his neck was starting to hurt a little, he got the strongest impression that if he did end up looking down, then he would really regret doing that. Mainly because of the other person that was currently in the room with them. Naturally, the moment Santoria spoke those words, the burning glare directed at him intensified. Just admiring the architecture. You may do that at your leisure when you return. Yeah, If you cannot look down, then I will be forced to strap a harness to your head. He could not have looked down fast enough. What greeted him was a smiling Mash, a stone-faced Santoria, and the bright red face of the director, who was now clad in the elf attire she had been vehemently denying the possibility of wearing until 5 minutes ago. He didn't know what Santoria said, but it was clearly enough to get the director to change her mind, sort of. She glared at him and he now looked down towards his feet. He didn't have the heart to tell her that she looked quite nice in the outfit. He had a feeling that saying something like that would actually make the situation much worse. He spared her another glance and was met by the same embarrassed glare that she had been giving him since she got back. Mash was wearing the same outfit though. He'd complimented her on it when she got back from changing. Olga gave a sharp intake of breath, her eyes snapped shut and she placed her hands on her hips. The red started to depart from her features as she breathed in and out several times, Eventually she lowered her hands to her side and let out a final long breath which seemed to drag out the last of her immediate anger. When she spoke, it was completely without emotion. Word of this never leaves this single day. This is something that never happened. There was never a singularity here. It was a training drill and that was it. Do we all understand? Why yes. He coughed out, wetting his lips as he did so and bringing his gaze towards Mash, who was similarly nodding her head up and down. Santoria merely scoffed. That depends upon your performance as an elf. The director twitched for a single moment, visibly fighting back the urge of saying something before her eyes opened up once more and she turned to Santoria. Let's just get this over with. We await one final elf. Wah. What's up, everyone? The room turned to the direction of the entrance to the Rayshift chamber. It was a greeting that lacked the energy it used to, but it was still rather light. Marie Antoinette walked into the room with her hand raised, wearing an identical elf outfit to the ones that Mash and the director were wearing. Sapphire blue eyes swept over the room before they halted. Marie stopped walking the second her eyes fell onto everyone else in the room. Rather swiftly, her eyes widened and her hand dropped down to her side. Life rushed back into her movements like a tsunami as she practically bounded towards them and let out a squeal as she did so. Being the closest to her, he was the first one she rushed towards as she stopped dead in front of him and brought her hands up to cover her mouth. It's so cute. It was a squeal in his face that with joy that was virtually infectious. His own smile built up at the same time he felt a rush of warmth through his cheeks as he turned away from her, not that it stopped the rider from dancing either side of him and bouncing with excitement. You've even got a little red nose and antlers. The little nose glows. She punctuated the statement by poking the nose with her finger, boop. And then pulling it back and giggling to herself as she turned her eyes downwards into what was around his neck. The amusement glowed brighter as she reached out and took the scarf into her hand and raised it up, the rainbow-like pattern, and ran her fingers over it. This is very well made. I heard that there was someone in the staff who knitted. You're wearing it down. The scarf Maxwell knitted him was tied around his neck and draped over his shoulders. It seemed strange to go down to a cold location without it. A shrug and then a smile was his reply to her. I think it's good to put it through its paces. Besides, it was a present and I want to at least show that I'm using it to the best of its abilities. Da Vinci even made it so I could wear it down to singularities without worrying about wear and tear. That's so sweet. Do you think he could make me something if I asked? I'm sure he'd be happy with it. We'd need some more wool, but we can have a look when we go down to resupply at a later date or something. With another smile, this one reaching her eyes brightly, she turned from him and towards someone else, likely onto Mash, given she rushed past him towards her and then stopped dead in front of the shielder. We match. It looks amazing. I thought I would be the only one who was wearing this, but everyone else is as well. She sniffled a little. It's amazing. Then she turned to the final person. Olga. She nodded once to the woman, then slowly approached her before bringing her hands up and swinging them down onto the shoulders of the woman, dragging her close to the point they were nearly nose to nose. You rock that outfit. He coughed into his hand, turning away and failing to hide the laughter. The fact Marie continued was incredible. That's the modern word for it, right? It feels right. You look really cute right now and we're matching outfits. I wasn't sure I'd be alright in this sort of thing, but with everyone else ready to give it their all, I can do it as well, right? She locked an arm around the director and drew her into a side hug, then did the same to Mash, all while grinning from ear to ear. He might have even seen a couple of tears prickling in her eyes as she did so. We're going to be the best Christmas elves to ever exist. I can already feel it. Riduska fought back the grin that threatened to emerge on his face, only just though, but he managed to catch the moment where Mash's eyes burned with excitement, then moved his gaze onto the director. Her expression remained frozen in a look of surprise, eyes focused on Marie now right next to her head before she made a small noise like clearing her throat. Her eyes closed and she let out a sigh that sounded more like a groan of exasperation. Peeling herself away from the group hug, she adjusted the coat she was wearing and tiredly waved her hand. Fine. She spoke with an exceedingly tired tone of voice. At the very least it does not appear as though this singularity is indeed something of a threat, but the fact remains that it exists and therefore we are compelled to investigate. If these are the stipulations required for entry, then I can justify this for a report. He hadn't heard anything about the outfits being a compulsory requirement though. In any event, now that we are all assembled, we would be best to depart. She carried on, either oblivious to or ignoring the bemused looks she was receiving in light of her explanation. Even Marie looked a little puzzled by what she had said. The cause of this singularity must be investigated if we are to prevent it from occurring in the future. Now then, when shall we depart? Santoria chuckled wryly under her breath. I am pleased to see that you have finally accepted your role as an elf. Perhaps if you could be honest with yourself. I'm not an elf, Olga replied swiftly and narrowing her eyes at Santoria with a mild scowl on her face. Her right hand came up as she pointed a finger at the servant. This is nothing more than a basic requirement for us to enter the singularity, nothing else. Much like a haze. That is what this is. We are under the influence of a haze that requires us to enter while wearing such ridiculous outfits. Where did these come from anyway? A moment to think and then she scowled. It was Da Vinci, wasn't it? Santoria regarded her for barely a moment, then turned away. It is not the place of an elf to question Santa. You merely assist. I'm not even an elf. I'm a human. I'm a human woman. Marie giggled. She approached from behind and then took hold of Olga's head before the woman could react. A moment later she was moving and placing something on the side of her head with speed that left the woman unable to react. When she pulled away he felt a strangled noise escape him and quickly slapped his hand over his mouth. You certainly share the appearance of an elf, Santoria declared with a smirk. If it were not so, then I would not be Santa. Do you still claim that I am not who I say? The director, now with pointy rubber tips on the ends of her ears, looked as though she was actually going to argue with her, but then snapped her jaw closed and turned to Marie, the writer smiling innocently as she finished placing another set on the ears of Mash before finally moving to herself. After a beat, Olga made a tired noise. Where did you get these? Marie just sent her an innocent smile without saying a word. Olga only groaned in response. I'm sure you'll be fine, director. He spoke with a reassuring voice. It's the holidays anyway. I'm sure Romani would be wearing a Santa hat or something if he was able. There can be only one Santa, Santoria stated, brooking no room for argument. Okay. He moved a hand towards his head before he paused, biting his lower lip. Should he call Ash? It was the holiday time but he still had no idea whether he was supposed to be able to do anything. Dragging him out would be just as bad if it ended up just not being something he enjoyed. No, when they got back from the singularity he would try and take Ash to a little Christmas party or something. Casual just so he could get out and about. Let's get going then. We've got a Christmas to save. Almost weekly Santa altar, too. This location was sufficient enough. His eyes moved along the full width of it and he found it content. A clearing in the midst of the woods and with a decent enough space that they could set up a Christmas field without being spotted from a distance. He had to account for Mash's senses as well. Then again, this area felt almost as though it was too perfect. He wasn't going to look this gift in the mouth, however. Ritska and the others would be arriving soon, if they hadn't already departed from Chaldea, so he needed to work quickly and he just didn't have the time to go out and look for a new location. This one would have to suffice and it could have been worse. A chime from his waist. He brought out the communication disc. The face of Romani emerged a moment later. They just left now. I've sent them to a location a few miles from where you arrived and from the looks of things, it'll be a good couple hours before they find you. That being if they were even looking for you in the first place. Good news, Fujimaru-kun is in high spirits. There was a pause, his expression turned a touch bemused as a frown emerged onto his features. Not quite sure how the director was convinced to wear the outfit, but I'm not going to focus on that. Have you found a location for them to start setting up? He elected to ignore the odd comment about Olga for the time being. Instead he nodded his head to the man as he replied. I have discovered a suitable clearing in the woods which will provide ample cover against spying. Wide enough that they can establish a decently sized location for them. I shall begin the summoning process and then bring down the other servants. A nod from the doctor, he seemed more relaxed than earlier. Good. Not sure how Pharaoh's kept Leo occupied, but it's working. I'll leave you to it and inform you of any changes. Good luck, Ash. It would be best if he responded. To you as well. He knew what he should say, he knew what was right to say. Merry Christmas, Romani. The words were delivered flatly, even he could tell how poorly they were spoken without an ounce of meaning to them. Nothing more than a courtesy of the holiday and little else. If Romani noticed, he did not say, rather he blinked in surprise, perhaps not expecting the comment from him. It was a surprise to him as well. Their features softened a moment later, a smile on their lips as they repeated the words back to him and then shut off the communicator. He clipped it back to his belt the moment the conversation ended, reaching into his bottomless box and pulling forth the summoning stone. Or the modified versions they had made during the course of the time Leonardo spent studying them. He wasn't sure how they worked now, but it wasn't his business. The stone hummed and glowed, pulling his hand along as he scrawled the glowing words into the snow. He couldn't understand what the scribbles meant, but he didn't need to as long as they worked. Upon finishing the final letter, he pulled back and stepped away. The pattern glowed for a brief moment and then shone bright enough that he nearly turned from it. As the light faded, the dirtied golden armor of Berserker stood in the snow where the writing had been. The blonde looked around for a few seconds before their mismatched eyes landed on him, tilting their head and speaking. I assume that they have already arrived then. Is this to be the location? He gave a single nod. Private enough that you can begin work without having to worry about interruptions. Yes. He extended the summoning stone to Berserker. They took it silently from him and held it in the palm of their hand. The others don't have independent action, they will be weakened as a result of the summoning. Bear that in mind. Berserker frowned, staring at the crystal then humming. I shall. You have my thanks for allowing us to find this location in the first place. I will ensure your efforts are well rewarded for this. He lowered the crystal to his side, then smiled at him. I'll start calling forth the others. I was told you were going to depart from us after this. He was. Singularities attract other creatures beyond those present within. Even without that, I will need to call forth others from Chaldea to delay the advance of Ritska and the others. I have another stone on hand for such an effort. He moved his hands to his bottomless box, unclipping it from his waist and then extending it towards Berserker as he did so. Not before drawing out Galvatine and slipping it onto his back with his other hand. More for the case of the former. As I make my way through the Singularity, I shall patrol the outskirts and keep away dangers to you, or send any stray servants summoned to find and help you if they are able. Boudica will know how to use this to call out your supplies. A troubled look from Berserker. Is this not yours? What if you require it? It is little more than a physical gate. I can bring forth what I need without it. Just that it would take a little more time if he was to do so. It was still much faster with the box. Though he doubted it would be necessary, he was much more capable now and he knew how to fight at least. I doubt you shall steal away with it. They looked at him with hesitation, then gave another nod as they took the box from him with surprising gentleness. I shall ensure no harm comes to it while it is in my possession. You have my word. I have done all I can on this end. He paused for a moment, then unclipped the second communicator he had brought with himself and handed it to the Berserker. Use that to commune with Romani and myself. I will alert you to any news that is pertinent. Are you aware of how to use them? The LDCDs. I have experience. Berserker replied as he set the disc atop the box. In this case, I shall leave you to your work. I await the time when you can return and benefit from the efforts of this goal. Merry Christmas, I believe the saying is. Christmas. He corrected on instinct, catching the wince before it materialized on his face, making a half turn and pausing for a moment. To you as well. With those parting words, he started his trek away from the Berserker and back into the woods which he had arrived from. There was still something odd about that servant. He did not recognize them in the least. From either the collection of memories from Solomon or from the minds of the souls within him, nothing about that servant struck him as being even remotely familiar. A quite literal stranger. Pleasant, he supposed. That aside, he would need to start bringing some of the other volunteers down soon. It was a different summoning than they were used to. The pull of the world and the sudden appearance was like swimming rather than the tug of a regular summon. All the same, the arrival was a touch colder than they were expecting, feeling the faint chill in the air as soon as they opened their eyes, then seeking out the shape in front of them as the form of the newly christened Avenger. They never heard of that class before, backed up a touch. They looked a little better than he remembered them being last time, which was good. Because last time they had been trying to kill one another. Hey, Ash! A wave of the hand and an enthusiastic voice directly into their face. They twitched for a moment but remained unmoved as they turned their eyes to the side. He followed their line of sight and found his attention gripped by the summoning from the outside. The words written on the ground burned as though they were on fire. A moment later there was a flash of light as a figure looked like they were climbing out of it and rising to their full height. Ooh, pretty. The transparent figure solidified, color arriving in their features and rolling their shoulders. Chevalier Diane stood there for a moment and then exhaled, bringing their hand up and opening and closing it several times. I see, I was warned of the weakness but I had not expected it to feel this way. Weakness. Had he been told about that? Maybe someone had mentioned it. He couldn't remember. This is an experience, to be sure. Another voice. That wasn't his voice, it didn't sound like Diane and Ash hadn't even opened his mouth. Whipping around, he pointed a finger at the one stood behind them, with a tepid smile on their face and a loose posture. One Sasaki Kojira stood there with a rather carefree look. I see, so we are the first ones to be called down. We are. He whipped back around to Ash. The Avenger stood there stock still. Are we? He blinked at them once. You are the first I have called forth. He reached for some silvery-looking thing on his waist and pulled it off, clicking it once and then bringing out a small blue man. Romani. How far are Ritska and the others? A good couple of miles. Wait a second, they're really close now. How did you teleport across there or something? They are close then. Good. Ash clicked the device off and slipped it back onto his waist, turning back to face him a moment later. Ritska and the others will be arriving shortly. I expect Diane and Kojira have recalled enough of the plan. I shall depart from you and leave you to it. That was all well and good. Actually, there was a lot he wanted to ask, but the first thing he noticed was something that he considered to be extremely important at the time. Hey, you didn't answer his question. He complained. The attention of Ash fell on him a moment later, a bemused frown on his face. Did you teleport? Silence for a good few seconds. Yes, niece. Bet that must be really easy, huh? His hands fell on his hips, he rocked back and forth and rolled his lips inwards. Must be great for saving time on long walks though, huh? But then what if you want to go for a long walk on the beach? Does it just become a short teleport across the beach? More silence. Ash looked away from him and to the others. You all remember the plan, yes? He pouted at being ignored. Diane replied before he could get a word out. I recall the plan, yes. Rest assured, I shall do my utmost to act for the benefit of Master. Ash made to turn, but someone would have to get up pretty early in the morning to get one over old Astolfo. He swung his arms up, opening his mouth and shouting out as loud as he could. Wait a single moment here. The attention fell back to him. Wait, what about me? He brought his arms back, pointing to himself and dropping his face. Didn't you explain the plan to me? Yes, but I assumed you would have forgotten it, Astolfo. Ash replied to him without even missing a beat. He had to blink at them and then nod his head up and down. That made a lot of sense to him, he probably had forgotten it already. Their eyes lingered on all of them for a few moments before he took several steps backwards. Keep them delayed for as long as you might be capable. Recall you cannot fight. Once you have completed your effort and they have moved on, then return to Chaldea and pass a message along to Romani. He will pass the message along to Berserker and then you can return. So they could come back. That was good. He didn't want to miss out on all the excitement. But then again, he talked about delaying them, but what were they supposed to do in the first place? Maybe he could think of something to try and keep them with them for a few minutes or something. Maybe he would be able to come up with some Christmas-related idea. He jolted at the pillar of light in front of him. Ash vanished a moment later and he pouted. I didn't even get to say goodbye or wish them Merry Christmas. Speaking of which, I have a plan to keep them delayed. Do we have any mistletoe? Kojiro just maintained his same patient smile. He didn't deny the plan, which meant that he was obviously in full support of it. Unfortunately, the same couldn't be said for Dian, who gave him the same sort of look that his king used to give him right before he explained to them that they couldn't do something that was obviously an amazing idea and was going to be really fun as well. His shoulders slumped before they even got a word out, lips quivering as he stared at them with the desperate hope that his enchantingly cute face would somehow manage to sway their heart. He was pretty cute, and this sort of worked most of the time on everyone else. They called it puppy dog eyes, and it would surely work now. We are not engaging in foolishness that will ultimately lead to emotional embarrassment. Dian's words were delivered as swiftly and sharply as the rapier on their waist, lips thin and eyes flat. Turning towards Kojiro, they continued onwards. We shall likely have mere moments before Master and the others are set to arrive. What suggestions have you for the time being? A hum from the assassin, and Astolfo felt a little sad that they hadn't asked him if he had a plan B. Which he didn't, because he was certain that plan A was going to work, but it would have been nice if they at least asked if he had a plan B. When Kojiro spoke, it was with the ghost of a smile. I might have some manner of plan. Though I cannot make any claims for how long it might delay them for. At the very least, it will earn their attention just long enough to buy a good few minutes. The eyes of the assassin drifted onto him and the smile widened. A plan that I believe you shall be in full support of. There was something about the smile that made Astolfo feel very happy all of a sudden, and any sort of plan that he could throw his support behind was obviously going to be an amazing plan. This is probably one of the better experiences of his life. If he was asked in that moment how he felt, even if not a lot had happened since they arrived, he couldn't quite get over the idea of just walking around Lapland while dressed as a reindeer while following someone dressed as Santa and accompanied by a couple of Christmas elves. Still, the lack of encountering anything thus far might have been a problem to some, but he was perfectly fine with it. There was something peaceful about all of it. Slowing his pace to a halt and turning his eyes to the sky, a smile on his face and hands on his hips. Without a cloud in the sky, the stars shone brightly down upon them, coupled with the other staple that most would know of. The northern lights. Patterns of light danced across the sky, a dazzling display which captured every moment of his attention. Aurora Borealis. A crunch of snow, and the comment informed him that Mash had come to a stop next to him. He glanced at her for a brief second and noted the wide eyes and slightly parted lips, an expression of clear awe. I've read about them before, but I didn't think that. Amazing, isn't it? He looked back to the sky. I've never actually seen them before either. Not in person anyway. Hear about them all the time or watch videos of them online. Always make a promise to one day see them in person, but you don't really think it's going to happen, and then, trailing off, he reached up and wiped at his eyes. Mentally cursing his overly emotional nature, he was very nearly crying at lights in the sky. Yes, senpai. I never. A sniffle from Mash. He didn't look, but it sounded as though she might be feeling much the same as him. I'm glad I got the chance to see something like this. I never would have thought. It's always so stormy outside Chaldea, so I don't get to see the night sky all that much. I think there was once a brief moment where the storm parted for a moment. Wodime-san and Daebit-san went outside to look at them, but it would have been gone by the time I arrived. I'm glad I got to see the same thing as them. He barely recalled hearing the names before, but he couldn't quite place them. He assumed them to be some of the staff members. Still, those were some wacky-sounding names all the same. Still, anyone who would run outside just to look at the northern lights if they had the chance didn't seem like that bad a person. Turning his head just over his shoulder towards the director and Marie, he saw the two of them similarly looking to the sky. The expression on Marie's face almost made him laugh, much the same as Mash, but with her hands cupped over her mouth. It's beautiful, he just caught her whisper under her breath. Olga stood silent for a moment, then adjusted herself with a faint clearing of her throat and spoke up. Yes, I suppose it is an eye-catching spectacle and certainly fitting for this sightseeing venture. Good thing she didn't catch him staring, otherwise he would have pointed out she was currently recording it with her communicator. Though I would point out that we must continue onwards, though I shall allow another minute for us to rest and recover before we continue onwards. He didn't laugh, but he turned towards Mash and sent her a wry smile at the same time she looked towards him. The two of them shared a quiet moment where probably both looked as amused as one another and then diverted their attention back to the sky. Thank you, Director. This is just me looking out for your master's health. Do not look into this situation so deeply. Of course, Director. Another crunch of snow. He heard Santoria come to a stop at his side and turned to face her with a raised eyebrow. She maintained a dispassionate gaze before a ghost of a smirk arrived on her lips. It would seem as though this is the moment in which you rest before making your journey onwards. I suppose I shall be generous enough to allow such a thing. You are, after all, a first-time reindeer and these are newly recruited elves. I shall temper my expectations of your capabilities to be easily distracted. A beat, then she reached into the white bag slung over her shoulder and pulled something out, sticking it directly into his face, going cross-eyed at the point that was almost touching his nose. He blinked at it, then looked at the stone-faced Santoria. He knew better than to ask if she was being serious. So he silently took the carrot from her grip and into his hand, giving it a once-over before he shrugged and took a bite out of it. The sudden crunch had him immediately feel the attention of everyone upon him. Turning around, he saw that the other three were now giving him looks that varied between puzzlement and amusement. In the case of Marie, the writer looked as though she would burst out laughing the second she saw what he was actually doing. He locked eyes with the director, staring her dead in the eyes as he made to take another bite. What's up, Director? He took another bite of the carrot and very nearly laughed at the way her expression flicked between annoyance and exasperation. She closed her eyes, let out a sigh, then opened them again and gave him a dry look. Refrain from making that manner of reference again, especially considering it would have been better served if you were dressed as a rabbit. Another matter, we have Romani in Chaldea who is an actual doctor. At the very least you could have salvaged something of the original reference in a manner that made sense. He stared, then sniffed. So what you're saying is I should somehow find a rabbit onesie and then make the reference, got it? That's not what Her jaw snapped shut, her hands flew to her face and another long and tired noise fluttered out of her before she dragged her fingers down her face, revealing a look that was genuinely exhausted. Whatever. As long as you're maintaining your health, I have no complaints, merely that you accepted the raw carrot and the treatment as though you were an actual reindeer. It's degrading. Was it degrading? He thought it was a little funny. Santoria wasn't making him pull a sleigh or anything, so that was good enough. With a shrug back to her, he turned back around and took another bite of the carrot. Certain that she had somehow raided this from the kitchen, he hoped that he wouldn't catch flack from Archer over it. Boudica and Sigward would be more understanding. Well, all of that aside, I've heard carrots are good for your eyesight. Turning to the person who would probably know about this, he gave Mash a slightly curious look. That's right, isn't it? Yes, Senpai. As expected, she was immediately on top of the explanation with a studious expression. Carrots contain a good deal of beta-carotene which is used to create vitamin A in the body which the eyes use to adjust to low lighting areas. So eating a raw carrot can only make you healthier so long as it has gone through the proper cleaning procedures after being harvested. Eyes turned to Santoria, she inclined an eyebrow and leveled a slightly annoyed look at him. What manner of rider would so poorly treat their mount? Should you fail it would only hinder me. Therefore, ensuring you are well fed is one of my priorities. Santa requires his reindeer to be at their best. Her eyes flickered down to the carrot and then back to him. Now eat. Well, that was that. Another crunch as he continued to eat the carrot, not all that bothered by the connotations. Really, it was just a bit of harmless fun at the moment. Beyond that, it might have been paying off if his eyes weren't playing tricks on him. He paused mid-chew and squinted at something just over the shoulder of Santoria and in the distance near a thin patch of trees. She noticed his gaze and turned, releasing a small noise of interest a moment later as she did so. Ho! The first of Santa's targets have emerged. He resumed chewing much slower, staring at the back of the servant's head as he realized what she had just said. Which sounded more than a little menacing now that he thought about it. Bringing his arm up, he pressed on the wrist communicator and flashed up the face of Romani. The man blinked twice and then performed a double take as he noticed the carrot in his hand. Hey, Roman, is there anything else down here with us? A wry chuckle from the doctor. Some of the servants found out you were down in Lapland and used the makeshift summoning from the Lord Vessel and the stones to come down for some fun. The words were accompanied by a scratch of the head and a shrug. I didn't think you'd run into any and it was something that just came to my attention. I would have told you earlier but I didn't want to spoil the mood. He was more surprised than off-put. They can come down by themselves. The director can attest to the quality of the summoning without a master. At the moment, for servants without independent action, it's seriously cutting down on their capabilities. Probably no stronger than a regular human at this point and none of their personal skills. He brought up his hands a moment later. Leo said it was still a prototype though, so this is something that's getting worked on rather slowly. I'm sure it will get better as things go on. It's stable at the moment, so the servants coming down are fine. That was more what he was worried about. With a nod of the head, he turned off the communicator and looked towards Santoria as she remained still for a few moments. Then she turned around and gave him a piercing look. For what reason do you remain still? There are those who expect the arrival of Santa. You would doom them with disappointment. He didn't say anything like that, nor did he really think of anything like that. With a look over his shoulder to the others, he jerked his head forwards while smiling from ear to ear. Come on guys. Santa said that we're gonna spread the Christmas cheer to everyone else. Both Marie and Masha's reactions were as excitable as he was expecting. The two of them clapped their hands together in a small applause. The reaction of the director was a little more lukewarm as she just folded her arms and gave him a flat look before rolling her eyes, not commenting on it but making her thoughts fairly apparent. He was sure she would get into the Christmas spirit eventually. This was turning out even better than he could have hoped. Seeing everyone working towards the same goal was already a reward enough in his mind. He couldn't explain it, he wasn't all that good with putting his thoughts into words, but it just made him feel warm inside at seeing all these humans working towards the same goal with smiles on their faces. How are things coming, sister? He called to Boudica. The woman paused for a moment the moment he finished speaking. A strange look upon her face and a shake of her head. She did that whenever he spoke to her and only when he called her sister. There might have been a problem but he wasn't sure what it was. They were brother and sister now that he had the soul of a human within himself, so it was just how they were. She turned to him and smiled, extending out the table she had withdrawn from the magic little box and wiping it off before pulling up the white cloth and throwing it over the top. It's certainly getting along rather well, Berserker. Though I do feel a little bad that we had to briefly borrow Ash's box and then fill it with all of this stuff so that it could be moved down to the Singularity, not to mention that he's the reason it all exists in the first place and he can't even have a break. Brother Ash is doing what he feels is right. We do our best and make the party work and that shall reward his hard efforts. A thump on his chest as he spoke, smiling to her as best he could. Those were his honest thoughts and he hoped to convey them to her. Where is the animal godling? Boudica jerked a thumb over her shoulder. He traced her movements to the little silver box she placed on one of the other tables. A moment later, the skin of the silver box turned red as she placed a metal pot on it. He briefly recalled that it was what humans used to burn their food, though how they did this without fire was a bit of a mystery to him. She's volunteered to take up the cooking. Rather adamant about it as well, but she's staked her reputation on it and Archon at least corroborated that she could actually cook, which, she waved her hand. Don't ask me how she could do that with her paws. The Silver Knight. Unpleasant thoughts were quelled deep within him. This was a time for celebrations, not for him to lose his emotions. He glanced at the movement. Boudica ceased her actions and was sending him a look. There was clear concern in her eyes, the type that need not be spoken aloud. A wave of his hand. It is fine. If she can burn the food with skill, then she can help. A snort from Boudica, a twitch of her lips. It's called cooking, but I can't exactly say you're wrong either. A shake of her head and she mumbled the words again under her breath while speaking something about telling the Sigward human about it. He didn't think he had said anything amusing, but perhaps it was his manner of speech that was odd. Regardless, he turned his eyes towards the latest arrival and felt as though he was going to freeze up on the spot. The human from the tree peoples. Ah, Torin. Boudica let out a happy call, bringing up her hand and waving to them. Happy to see you arrive. How are things going back at Chaldea? Well met, Boudica. Torin greeted her back, bereft of his helm and with a hand brought up to greet her. Moving towards them and smiling cordially. I bring good news from Chaldea. It seems as though Master and the others are in high spirits. Though my own master is a touch cold to the endeavor, it would seem as though she did agree to the outfit. Making merry with her subordinates in this jolly time, he paused for a moment, nodding his head from side to side. I am certain that the Child of Light will have some words of encouragement for her should he discover it. Another chuckle from Boudica. Is that what we're calling teasing now? She paused for a moment, then gestured to him. Ah, I don't know if you've met Berserker yet. Torin turned to him and his expression stiffened the moment the human did so, their brows furrowed a touch and a hum rippled from their throat. Berserker, ah, yes. The other contracted to our master. I do not believe we have met, but I suppose there is no better time for a meeting than a ritual of joining such as this. Even if it is not one my people would have practiced. He mutely nodded his head up and down. We are well met as well then, though I suppose our introduction is a long time coming. They stepped forwards and extended their hand to him in a clear gesture. He remained silent as he gazed down at the limb, then reached out and slowly took it into his own and shook the limb up and down before retreating. If Torin noticed anything amiss, then he didn't notice all that much as he similarly pulled his arm back. I understand that my aid is required with this particular endeavor. Something related to trees. See Christmas tree. He cursed himself for his short stutter. He calmed his nerves and spoke once more. They take a tree and decorate it for the festival. We have some decorations for one that were packed up, but we need a good tree. I wanted the very best for the celebration. A hum from Torin. He reached up and rubbed at his gray beard with a thoughtful look in his eyes. I can see why you would come to me for help then. I know a good deal about the trees and could likely aid you. Though I ask that I select the tree in question, even if this remains a singularity, proper respect should be shown to them. It is about finding the tree I agree with, not the one you feel looks the best. I understand. Silence from the man. Their eyes roamed over him for a few seconds and then he gave a single pleased hum, a touch of a smile on his face. Good. It might not be a festival of my people, but I can offer my aid in a ritual of joining if that is what this is. Come then, let us see what manner of tree we might find for the honor of this celebration. He paused, realizing what they were asking. You mean me? Torin blinked. Yes. You are likely to be the stronger of the two of us on account of retaining your abilities from the unique summon. Even the strength of the god in me grants me only a modicum of my strength. I am not quite as useful in physical matters as I otherwise would be. You will need to carry the tree. Yes, yes he would. Another nod from him. Of course. Let us be quick then. They were both moving before his brain could catch up with what he was actually doing and who he was with. Following after the human as they walked across the length of the camp and past some of his other brothers and sisters as they worked on the other small tables and the sort they had been in charge of setting up. I did not think they could fit so much in a small box. He spoke without warning, surprising himself at speaking aloud as he did so. The bottomless boxes are certainly living up to their reputation, that much I know of. Torin replied with a faint noise of mirth. I doubt this was their intended use, but that is of no consequence now, so this endeavor was inspired by your own efforts, as I understand it. How did they know about that? The question was buried. It had been news for 3 or so days now since their initial meeting and had been spread across all of Chaldea. It was a stupid thing to consider, but still, he didn't think that people would have known it more or less came from his initial plan, and even then, he couldn't take credit for it. Thinning his lips, I wished to do something to make everyone in Chaldea feel better. Christmas was just suggested to me as a way to do that. Boudica and the others deserve just as much credit. His eyes dropped to the side, his lips pulled down into a frown. I didn't achieve all that much on my own in the first place without their help. A beat, then a hum from ahead of him. I would not so quickly dismiss your efforts. The best hunters are those who work in packs. The pack with the strongest bonds is the pack that lives the longest. Your efforts, indeed, this goal of yours, is a worthy one worth having. I do not doubt that without it, we would not be here. They stopped walking, then turned to face him and offered a smile. Do not be so quick to doubt yourself. Perhaps another might have thought of it, but you acted first. Raising a hand, they pointed it squarely at his chest. Keep that in mind, Berserker. There is no greater rot than needless doubt in one's abilities. I would not call it needless. A moment, they looked into his eyes and they softened. I see. You know the loss of others well, don't you? I shall speak no more of it then. Understand that I know that pain deeply, it has grown strong in my own heart. But do not let your fears hold you back, if not for your own sake, then for those who care for you. His lips pulled into a strained expression. I have seen the foolish nature of them for myself, but enough of this misery. We have a tree to find. He turned and started to walk. Calamate paused for a moment before he followed after them. Can I ask you something? You might. Torin didn't even hesitate. What were your people like? I heard they worshipped trees. They stopped walking, then let out a faint chuckle and turned back to face him. A hand came up and rubbed at their chin while slowly nodding up and down. Yes, I imagine that is how it would look to the outside world. Worshipping trees instead of gods. Well, I can tell you of the happy times of my people then, those are worth more to be now anyway. He jerked his head and resumed walking. Calamate listened with rapt attention. Torin sounded happy speaking of his people. That was good. This wasn't what he had expected. Sure, he had seen them from a distance, but as he got closer it got much harder to contain his laughter, to the point where he had been chuckling to himself for the last minute or so as he got closer and closer. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to expect, but Dian and Sasaki making a snowman of all things wasn't one of those things he had been expecting, if he was being honest. Well, it certainly was within the holiday spirit of things, but neither of the two of them ever gave him that sort of impression. Well, he was happy to be wrong. If there had ever been a chance for the element of surprise, it had long since been lost as his laughter echoed out loud enough for the pair of them to turn and stare at him. The basic shape of the snowman had already been made in 3 segments, rather traditional in look, and with Dian sporting a pair of sticks that they doubtless were planning to use as arms. In the hands of Sasaki were a small collection of stones, being in the middle of adding some features to the icy creation. The two of them regarded him with mixed expression. Dian looked more surprised of the two of them with clear confusion on their face. Sasaki didn't even look as though he was fazed in the least by the attire that they were all wearing. But that was just the sort of thing Sasaki was like. He wasn't sure he ever saw them get affected by anything that happened. Dian, Marie called out with clear amusement in her voice. I didn't know you were the type to make snowmen. It looks so fun. Did they have a name? Dian was silent for a moment, turning to the snowman and then back to Marie before they opened their mouth to speak and slowly closed it again. Their expression flickered for a few seconds with doubt before they eventually spoke up. We're still failing to come up with a name, Your Majesty. Though, if you wish to be the one to name them, then you are free to do so. I'm certain it would be better than my own attempts. A wince from them as they turned and thrust the first of the sticks in the side. I confess that this is my first time ever attempting something such as this, and I'm unsure as to how well it is currently looking. Most of my knowledge is coming from the throne and images related to Christmas itself, that and Kojiro was kind enough to walk me through the initial stages of it. I wouldn't want to try and steal this from you, Dian. Marie replied quickly, stepping forwards and waving to the snowman with a bright smile. You were the one who made them, so you should give them a name. Besides, I think they look very charming for a first-time effort of a snowman. Don't you, Olga? Ritska leaned to the side to look at the expression of the director, her features pinched before they relaxed, and she waved a hand. It looks very expected of a snowman. Though I am not one to ask about such things. It never held much relevance before, and I have little need to change such a thing now. A scoff as she turned her head from them. You would all be better informed than myself. Is that truly the case? Sasaki commented as he placed the stones in his eyes. I would have thought that modern humans celebrated Christmas a great deal more than those in the past. Especially considering that it did not even exist for me, not in the way you would have expected. He turned to them with a raised eyebrow. Were you not one of the humans who frolicked about in the snowy fields, throwing balls of ice at one another and making angels in the snow? Olga let out a noise and regarded him with a mildly annoyed look. Are you mocking me? Do I seem to be the sort to waste my time with such frivolous things? I was much too busy with important efforts. Really, you seem to be rather festive to me. Sasaki pointedly looked her up and down, the smirk widened just a touch. Especially given your current attire. I would say you are more in touch with the holidays than myself at this point. Shut up. This has nothing to do with the holidays. You imply that you would wear such outfits any other day of the year. A look of faux surprise from the man with a tone to match, nodding his head to the side. Perhaps I misjudged you quite a bit. Though you do have some confidence about you, maybe I am more the fool for thinking you would not be willing to partake. A moment of silence. When the holiday of Easter rolls around, shall I expect a bunny outfit? An image popped into his head. It didn't leave quite as swiftly as it had arrived, and he was a little guilty about that. Mainly because even with a bunny onesie, he suspected that it would have been just as good. He rolled his lips and looked to the side, both to hide his smile and hopefully any indication as to what he was thinking. He was treated to the sounds of the director making a series of noises that barely even sounded human. His lips pursed and he bit the inside of his cheek to stop himself from laughing at the sounds. It worked, allowing him to chance a glance to see her face was apple red, cheeks puffed out and eyes wide. The image of her head just blowing up played on repeat inside his head because of how it looked to him. Though that wasn't nearly as much of a surprise as Marie just behind the director with a distant look in her eyes as she was seemingly debating something. Something flickered through her eyes for a moment as she looked down at herself and released a small hum for a moment before bringing her head up and speaking rather suddenly. Do you think that's the sort of thing we should do? I think I would look rather cute as a bunny rabbit. What do you think, Deanne? Maybe we should do some animal-themed costumes for later in the year. He coughed out a snort at the same time Deanne froze up at the sudden question. Their eyes flickered around for a moment before they replied. I'm sure that you would look most eye-catching in the costume of an animal, Your Majesty. Though I am a touch worried about your appearance if you were to walk around with a costume of sorts, but if that is what you feel like doing. You mean you wouldn't join me? She used the puppy dog eyes on Deanne. Something they were clearly weak to if the visible flinch was any indication. The fact that Marie even took off her hat and held it below her chin with both hands and a quivering lip showed she was clearly something of a master when it came to it. Naturally, Deanne folded instantly. He was just glad she hadn't asked him. She wouldn't have even needed to do the puppy dog eyes. With a smile, she placed the hat back atop her head. Do not expect the same of me. Santoria scoffed from her spot. This is an exception and nothing more. The notion of adorning myself with the ears of a mere rabbit. Laughable. He shrugged, never say never and all that. What was that, Rudolph? Nothing, Santa. HMPH. Mash chose that moment to speak up. I don't think we have enough materials to even make all those sorts of costumes to begin with, Your Majesty. Sounding apologetic, she let out a sigh. Maybe if we traded, but we need to think about our own supplies first and foremost. Maybe if we have some left over we might be able to. I draw the line at dressing up as cuddly animals. The director barged in at the tail end of the conversation with a hard tone of voice, pointing down as she did so and with narrowed eyes. This is the very limit of what I can entertain. You shall not catch me dressed as a fox or a bear or a raccoon or a hamster or any other sort of animal. This is only because of the situation and certainly not because I like it. She whirled on Sasaki. And don't look at me with that smirk as though you know better. I'm not going to dress up like some sort of pantomime actor for a holiday. Sasaki kept on smiling. I never inferred you would perform for the theater. That aside, master. He blinked as the assassin turned on him. I believe that the honor of placing the final piece should fall to you. As you are here, though I am saddened by our lack of carrots, I believe that a stone shall suffice. Carrots. He turned to Santoria. Every carrot you trade is one you shall not eat. They responded without even missing a beat. They are for your consumption, not to serve as decorations. Food is to be eaten, not worn. Stones it was then. He turned back to Sasaki and approached the man as he held out a small rounded stone towards him. The only spot left on the snowman's face was where the nose would go, a curved dotted row of pebbles serving as a smiling mouth and two slightly larger stones as his eyes. It was oddly cute in a way. Taking the stone from Sasaki, he nodded his head to the man in thanks and stood directly before the snowman. With a gentle hum, he approached it and placed it where it best served its purpose. Excellent. Sasaki commented from behind him. I believe this is enough time. You may begin, Astolfo. Astolfo was here, but how come he didn't see? The head of the snowman abruptly separated from the rest of the body. A pair of arms burst from the side and grabbed it and pulled upwards. His eyes widened as a rush of pink burst out from the body and shot upwards. Time slowed as he stumbled backwards, mouth parting in shock as the paladin in question emerged from within the snowman itself, maniac grin on their face as they held the rounded ball of snow above their head with only one intention. Oh! With a predatory glow in Astolfo's eyes, he swung the snow downwards before he could even move. His world turned dark and cold in the next moment as his vision was blocked out, quickly coming to the realization that the head of the snowman had just been dropped on him. His surprise left him unable to do anything as something placed itself behind his legs and he was shoved backwards, slipping up and falling down with a muffled crunch all around him. Even still, he heard the yell of Astolfo loud and clear. Snowball fight. It had happened in an instant. 1 second she had been suffering from yet another case of insanity induced by whatever this was supposed to be. Something she was suffering from with disturbing frequency. And then in the next moment the snowman blew up to reveal the paladin Astolfo, who then slammed a ball of snow onto his master's head and threw them into the ground, all while cackling like they were insane. No, not like they were insane. They were insane, that was the only answer she could conclude. Snowball fight. Astolfo bellowed at the top of his lungs. She froze on the spot when his eyes snapped to her with clear intent behind them. Shooting down and scooping up a handful of snow and then swinging it towards her, she dropped down as it sailed overhead. Wah! Something cold slammed into her face and she fell backwards, coughing from the shock of it as she did so. It wasn't that it hurt, more the surprise of actually being struck in the face. She brought her arm up and wiped her face clean and looked to the direction the attack came from. Chevalier Diane was already going for yet another one when they suddenly rolled to the side to avoid a counter-attack from Marie. The rider stepped over her defensively. That was a sneaky ploy of yours, Diane. Marie accused, but for whatever reason, she didn't sound as though she was angry at all. Instead it was as though she was about to start laughing. Was this your goal from the start? A wry smile from the servant and a shrug of the shoulders. I believe you would encourage me to get into the spirit of the holidays, Your Majesty. Though it pains me to do anything that might harm you, I suspect you would enjoy this much more. Their features narrowed as they dropped and rolled again, scooping up more snow and throwing it. Marie dodged with ease while she laughed joyously. Of course. Come at me, Diane. I'll beat you. She was still sitting on the ground, flummoxed as a cry of effort and a noise snapped her head just in time to see Mash nail Astolfo in the face with a snowball and stagger them backwards. All while she'd paused after that and looked around. Did I do that right? King Arthur merely grunted. A suitable counter-attack. Yet your opponent still stands. Carry on, elf. Fight until they can stand against us no more. Those who challenge Santa must be shown the error of their ways. The fact she said something like that with a straight face was utterly bewildering. She opened her mouth to call out what an utterly stupid act this all was before being struck in the face once again, the snow splattering against her left and earning a squeak from her. With a deft roll she avoided the next one and crawled along the ground until she was crouched down. Sasaki Kojiro merely smiled at her as though nothing was wrong. His hands came out of his sleeves with another sphere of snow in his hands. That was when Fujimaru burst from the snow and threw it off his face, sweeping around with a look on his face just as insane as Astolfo. His eyes darted around until they landed on the paladin. The two of them stared down the other until they both dropped and grabbed the snow, instantly leaping away from the other and throwing their ammo at their opponent, laughing all the while. "Good aim, master," Astolfo called out, sliding to a halt before they finished. "That is, if you were aiming to send the snow back home." "Just keep talking, Astolfo," Fujimaru called back as he squared his posture. "I'm carrying the pride of Rudolph right now. No way am I losing in a snowball fight. Ha 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 ha. You'll never beat me. As long as the moon shines, my power is blessed like that of a paladin." Another snowball hit her face. She snarled and didn't even hesitate, turning on Sasaki and scooping her hands down into the snow and rising up, yelling as she returned attack on the assassin. "Stop throwing snow at me." He sidestepped her with ease. The raised eyebrow he sent her all but confirmed he was mocking her. She felt her veins bulge and only a single look ran through her mind. She was going to wipe that look off his face. "Mash!" She called out to the shielder and dropped down, grabbing more snow as she did so. "You're going to help me, now." Not even waiting for a response, she hurled the next batch of snow towards the man who danced around her attacks as though they were nothing. She caught King Arthur watching the proceedings with a dispassionate look. "Why aren't you doing anything?" A scoff. "For what reason would I do so? This is the role of Santa's helpers. I'm not an L." A snowball to the face cut her off. She let out a scream of fury as she ignored them and went back to throwing back at the assassin. Almost weekly Santa altar. 3. The names glowed on the ground as the figures rose up from the summoning. He took a step backwards as they appeared and looked around. Their confusion lasted until they landed upon him and then their expressions settled into something else. Gareth smiled upon seeing him, nodding her head to him and greeting all while Vrindari folded her arms over her chest and tightened her posture. Sanora, meanwhile, adopted much the same manner of welcoming as the other shielder, and even through the helmet, he could feel the glares of the two of them being aimed onto him. Not that it was without merit, he supposed. "I'd ask you to put whatever personal feelings you have for me aside for the time being in this common goal." He looked between the two biggest offenders. Neither showed much effort in trying to do anything of the sort, but that was their choice. "Romani tells me that Ritska and the others have managed to fight past Astolfo's group. They are not far from this location and will be here soon. I won't insult you by explaining your plan again and will leave you to it." Neither Vrindari nor Sanora stopped glaring at him from behind their helms, their dislike of him rather palpable. They didn't speak, but they didn't need to. Even Gareth could tell what they were doing if her wince of discomfort was any indication as to what was going on. He swept his eyes over the group one final time before he turned and started to walk away. "Merry Christmas, Ash." He stopped at the words of Gareth, turning to see her smiling and waving her hand at him as though nothing was wrong. Whether it was born of his appearance to her older brother or just because she was being polite, he found it as though he didn't put much thought into it. He merely rolled his lips inwards and nodded back to her. Her smile brightened a touch from the simple gesture and he turned once more, walking away from them and calling upon the miracles deep within him. A pulse of magical energy and he vanished in a flash of light. Ash wasn't even gone for a single second before Vrindari whirled onto her. The slight intake of breath was all the warning she got before the shielder spoke with a strained and rather irritated tone of voice. "How can you still act so cordially with that betrayer? He insults every vow a knight has ever made, and worse, he does so with the attitude of complete dispassion within his own expression." Sanora nodded her head up and down in support. It made her heart ache a bit at seeing the both of them gang up on someone who wasn't even here to defend himself. Though she doubted it would have made much of a difference, Ash probably would have just faced them in silence and said they were right or something. That's probably what Gawain would have done if he was here. I concur. With knowledge of what happened, I do not understand why he is even allowed to draw breath where he might break oath and turn his blade upon us once more. Sanora remarked with a wave of her hand and a turn of their helm towards her. I understand the principle of being kind to one's allies, but there must be limits to such things, Sir Gareth. She sighed. I don't understand all that much that happened either. The report we all read didn't say much about the intricacies, but all I know is that Ash was in a bad place when it happened and it's clear he regrets it. Shrugging her shoulders, she looked between the two of them with a frown. I would say that someone who breaks their vows and regrets it is better than someone who does so and cares nothing for it. At least Ash is trying to make amends by helping out with this. If he wasn't, then I would agree with you, but it sounded like he was put through something hard, and until I know the full story, I won't rush into judgment over it. Their heads turned to the side to avoid looking directly at her, their postures loosened a bit from how they had been moments ago. Neither of the two of them said much of anything for a few moments before Vrindari let out a sigh, bringing her hand up and placing it on the front of her helm, dragging her fingers along an armored brow as their other hand fell onto their hip. Yes, I suppose there is some merit in his seeking of redemption. He is a far sight from the deceiver Sullivan, at least. Not as though I am one to start casting down judgment on the matter of oath-breaking. She winced at the slightly bitter tone of voice, but was at least happy they were starting to back down on it. It vexes me, is all. Sanora grumbled to herself, kicking at the snow as she did so. Long did I uphold my own oath in spite of all the destruction that befell the kingdom. Until it became a ruin and the world passed it by, long did I stand guard, but perhaps the same is not quite so possible for others. Another mutter from her. I suppose he isn't even a knight to begin with, so I can't expect the same of him. That sounded incredibly backhanded to her, bringing a touch of a frown to her for a brief moment before she wiped it away. They were passionate about the subject and she could understand them rather well. It wasn't as though she didn't see where they were coming from, just that as long as Ash wished for a chance to be better, then she didn't see a reason to say no. He did step up and save their master's life, so that counted for something in the end. Though this was hardly the time for that sort of depressing talk. So what are we actually going to do when Master gets here? The question was met with silence. Gareth felt her expression plummet at the fact neither of the other two had anything to say. Sanora merely twitched for a moment before pointing to herself. Do not look to me, this is a holiday I had never heard of until I was approached and asked to help. I have never even seen this manner of landscape before in all of my tactics for delays, as they are put, relate to warfare. She turned to Vrindari, who similarly shrugged her shoulders. I'm afraid not, I was relying on you for this, Gareth. It is a festival from your world, not mine. I suppose it did sometimes get cold enough for snow in Drangleic, but when that occurred, all we ever did was clear the paths so that carts could get through, nothing else. There was a beat before she spoke again in a strained voice. You don't have a plan either, do you? A nervous giggle bubbled up from inside her as she glanced between the two of them, bringing up her left hand and scratching the back of her head as she did so. Eventually, she offered a single shrug of her shoulders and cemented the fact that she didn't have a plan either. A groan escaped Vrindari's helmet, her hand slapped the front of it. Outstanding. Between the three of us, we're tasked with delaying our liege so that the others can complete preparations, but none of us can consider a single plan that likely doesn't involve some manner of pit trap or leaping from the snow to stick them with a spear. She waved a hand around at both her and Sanora before dropping it down. What are we supposed to do now? Gareth frowned in thought. Maybe if the three of them put their heads together they could come up with some sort of suggestion, but for right now, there wasn't much time to consider. Better sooner than later. If Ash's words were anything to go by, Master would be here soon, and if they didn't have anything planned then they wouldn't put up much of a delay beyond striking up a conversation. Her eyes swept around the landscape before they abruptly halted on something, they narrowed for a moment and then she started walking. The other two paid attention to her movements as she gradually made her way towards the location of interest, picking up her speed into a gentle jog before sliding to a halt in front of it. A topic filtered through her mind, something that was popular with modern humans in regards to the snow. The incline was sharp and long enough that it served its purpose for sprouting the idea. Her eyes widened and her lips pulled upwards into a steadily rising grin. A moment later, she turned to the other two who were fast approaching her. The smile widened and she let the question slip towards the person in question. "Hey, Vrindari, can you access your shield?" The helm jolted as though Vrindari blinked, pausing for a moment and then nodding once. "I can call it forth, but my noble phantasm is locked in this form. It serves as a shield, why do you ask?" She pointed downwards, the near 10-meter incline hill that went straight down to a relatively smooth clearing beneath them. "Because, I have an idea on how we can distract Master." He sensed them the moment he appeared, a touch of something on the edge of his senses as he approached them. 3 servants, relatively weak in terms of strength, but he recognized the both of them from past encounters. It did not make this any less uneasy for him given the last time he had met with the two of them, picking up speed until he was jogging along. They would probably sense him approaching, but that was fine. He wanted them to know he was coming to not alarm them. Keeping Galvatine on his back as he did so, hopefully showing that he meant neither of them any harm. The lights ahead of him signaled his approach, raising a lone eyebrow at what appeared to be some manner of house made of a material that looked nothing like wood. Squinting his brows, the exterior of it was a light brown color, but the texture was all wrong, varying between rough and smooth, with the features of the building looking far from ideal. Almost as though they had been exaggerated, to say nothing of the windows and doors, which were lined with a thick white substance which vaguely reminded him of the wax from the archives. With a mental shake of his head, he dismissed the odd structure and carried on with his approach, soon spotting the silhouettes near a glowing blue light at the base of a small tree. Their intent was obvious enough, and he supposed it worked to the aid of others and likely themselves if their interest lay in the celebration of the holiday. His pace slowed into a steady walk, keeping his arms by his side and trying to appear as unthreatening as possible as he drew closer and closer, only pausing when he noticed something next to him. A patch of snow that had been blasted aside like it had been struck with something. At the center of the impact crater was a section of scorched ground. Eyes narrowed, he leaned over it and looked down. Frown forming on his features. With a grunt, he filed it away for questioning and turned back to the 3 who moved around the small pine tree in the middle, strung up with loose decorations and made to look like a rough Christmas tree. But he supposed they were making do with the best they could scrounge up, which wasn't a lot, and he could notice their efforts at least. He stopped at the edge of the camp with a crunch of snow. The sounds abruptly silenced themselves as they all turned to him and away from what they had been previously doing. His eyes roamed over each and every one of them as they regarded him back with clear apprehension. The actions of the white-haired girl in the black cloak didn't surprise him, immediately turning to him with wide eyes and moving her hand towards something under her cloak. He wasn't even sure if she remembered him or not. It could have just as easily have been a result of his very being. The connection between the two of them registered instantly with him. He could feel the many souls within her, yet they did not fight as his own collection did. There was a serenity to her nature which eluded him, perhaps the common nature of her existence. The souls were bound under a single goal. His had been taken with force. All the same, it mattered little in the end. Raising his hand slow enough that she could see, he exposed his bare palms to her in a sign of surrender. She paused at his movements, her eyes narrowed for a moment before she stopped. His eyes darted to the girl next to her, having reached over and placed a hand on her shoulder to stop her from making any sudden movements. With a shake of her head, nursery rhyme warned Jack away from the aggressive actions, pulling her arm back and then placing both her hands on her lap as she assumed a more casual seating position on the floor, her eyes looking him up and down with silent intrigue but little else. Someone cleared their throat. He turned to the tallest of the trio. Amber eyes gave him a rather blank look for a moment before returning to the wreath they were fitting together, humming along to themselves. Keeping his arms up, he spoke in a quiet voice with as little threat as he could muster. The end result was a flat emotionless sentence. I'm not here for violence. A moment of silence from the redhead, then he replied to him. The lack of a flaming hot sword being swung at my neck and the absence of a murderous look in your eyes clued me into that. So it is certainly an improvement over our last encounter. The voice of the boy was rather wry, as though it was somehow funny to him. When they looked up, they wore a similar smirk to Archer. All the same, if you're not here to fight then I don't suppose you're here for the holiday cheer. His eyes moved to the other two. Both Nursery and Jack were now looking at him with a great deal more interest. Thinning his lips, his eyes moved between the two groups before finally settling on the teenage-looking boy and then nodding his head once. Much to the clear surprise as their eyes widened a moment later. That is, why I am here. Sully blinked repeatedly at him, still clearly not prepared for his answer, then proceeded to look him up and down before he lowered the wreath he had been making and made a small grunt. The silence continued on. He looked to the other two and saw they were similarly looking at him with matching features of surprise, though he noticed that Jack moved a hand away from the cloak and back into the open, bereft of anything threatening and with a look on her face that was moving into bemused hesitance than outright suspicion. An improvement, at least. The redhead moved his left hand to his chin and rubbed back and forth. After a few moments of nothing, he eventually spoke up. I suppose that's a different matter then. Nursery told me about this being a holiday of coming together, but I didn't think it would be quite that effective in the matter. Still, he smiled. I see no reason to complain, though I'd be curious as to how this came about in the first place. Are you still allied with Chaldea or have you since parted ways? That was a fair question, he supposed. We're still working together. Good enough then. Sully dismissed quickly, looking back down to the wreath and going back to working, speaking as he did so. I've never really thought much of holidays before. They certainly sound like a lot of effort, but Nursery promised me that they are rather fun and I'm not going to deny any of them that just because I don't get it, though it might just be my own nature at putting decorations on the body of a dead tree that stops me from having some fun. A chuckle from the boy and a look towards Nursery. The caster turned her head to look at him for a moment and then pouted. But you were the one who insisted on decorating the tree in the first place. I let you and Jackie put the star on the top. Sully defended quickly, pointing to her with a grin. Besides, the two of you were decorating it rather unbalanced and the like. It was leaning too heavily on one side and all the colors didn't blend well together. The star is the important bit, after all. The continued pout from Nursery didn't do much to convince him that she was won over by the argument. With an exhale she turned towards Ash and thinned her lips. He stared down at her as she silently watched him. Keeping her eyes firmly on his own before her lips slowly spread into a more welcoming smile, though Jack looked far from at ease. I'm happy you came down here for Christmas though. I think having a little moment where we can all come to the home of Santa is truly something out of a fairy tale. He kept silent at her words, not knowing all that much about fairy tales in the immediate sentence as he spoke again. How long have you all been present in the Singularity? Sully blew air out of his mouth and shrugged his shoulders. No more than 10 or so minutes. Though these two might be a little longer. He gestured to the girls. I stumbled onto them trying to make a Christmas tree and then started to help them out. Also because they were spreading warnings of something walking through the snowy fields. A blink, then he turned on Nursery with a raised eyebrow. It was Krampus, she declared. A complete lack of elaboration forced him to cycle through his own mind and drag forth the experiences and memories. He winced as he searched through every mention of the word from those he had seen, grimacing deeper the longer it went on before he found the name and the information. His brows pinched. Krampus. You are telling me that Krampus is here? Santa fought him off. The shout from Jack brought his attention to the other girl, who was grinning from ear to ear as she waved her hands around dramatically. He and the big monster fought over the Christmas tree and then Santa sent them running. He gave me and Nursery toys for being good girls and then he chased after them. She held up two small objects in her hand as though to show them off. He squinted at them as he tried to make sense of the sentence and took in the details of the toys. In her left hand was a wooden carving of a small horse in the midst of rearing up. In the right was what he could only describe as a rough-looking cut of a silver knight, or so it appeared. The shape of the armor with the horned helmet gave him that impression. He turned on Sully, they merely shrugged their shoulders at him. Do not ask me, they have been speaking of the shadow monster fighting who they claim is Santa. All I know is that there was a battle here until I fixed the camp as best I could. He waved a hand around. I opted to stay and help them with Christmas mainly because I'd never heard of it and it did sound like it would be fun to help. Jack stuck her tongue out at him and made a noise. Big brother stole the Christmas tree from nursery and me. She folded her arms over her chest, jutted her chin up and made a HMPH sound as she turned to the side and closed her eyes. Much to the clear exhaustion of Sully, whose features dropped at her performance. Bringing a hand up, the redhead rubbed over his forehead before he let out a noise. Would you like me to take down the decorations so you two could have a go at it this time around? The assassin instantly opened her eyes and beamed widely at him. Really? Yay. With a fist pump, she turned on nursery and leaned down, grabbing the girl and excitedly pulling her to her feet as she did so, virtually shaking all the while. We get to decorate the tree. We can show Santa when he comes back from killing Krampus. That sounded disturbing to him for whatever reason. Nursery giggled lightly before placing a hand on Jack's shoulder. Before we get to all of that, perhaps we should listen to what Mr. Ash came here to say. He's here to celebrate the holidays as well, remember? She turned to him, softly smiling as she did so. Would you like to help us as well? Thinning his lips, he shook his head. I doubt I would offer much in the way of cheer. I am in the same position as Sullivan. He closed his eyes and sighed. Sully. He corrected himself, with little of the same joy. Though I was searching for other servants who might be willing to help out with a party that Chaldea was assembling. The trio stared at him. Jack raised a hand. Is the tree bigger? A glance to the small pine that barely even reached his shoulders, then back to the girl as he replied. I would assume that it is larger, yes. Can we decorate that one? I'm certain you could ask. The expression on the girl's face turned thoughtful. She cupped her chin and rocked back and forth on her heels, visibly debating his words while making a series of noises. She glanced at the tree and then to the others before she finally brought her hands up and placed them against the side of her head, turning on nursery. What should we do? A smile from the caster. Christmas is all about being with friends, so it makes sense to go where everyone else is. Her attention returned to him. I assume that we would be welcomed there, yes. He nodded. Then I see no reason why we should avoid it. If it's a big party for Chaldea, then I'm sure that it will be a lot of fun. Okay. Jack grinned, then paused as she turned to the smaller tree with a saddened frown on her face, approaching it and then placing her hand on the leaves. The forlorn expression remained on her face, closing her eyes and dragging her fingers down and back to her side, almost as though she was parting with an old friend. It made him feel uneasy just watching her, though for reasons that he felt disgusted with. He still couldn't sort out his feelings in regards to the small girl. He didn't like she existed, but seeing the despairing expression on her face made it all the worse. He made the choice in his head. Clearing his throat, he gestured to the small tree. My method of transport is swift enough that we could take the tree with us. I'm certain they would not object, if it means so much to you. Jack stared at him with wide eyes, clearly surprised by his words. The despair vanished from her face and was replaced with pure joy, letting out a happy yell and turning to nursery, excitedly calling out as she did so. Did you hear that? We get to bring our tree with us and decorate it all over again. We get our own tree. Their excitement made little sense to him, but it was fine in its own way. She was happy. Something caught the corner of his eye. He turned and looked to see that Sully was staring at him with a mixture of surprise and amusement on his face, silently observing the proceedings. He merely grunted to them, bringing his arms up and crossing them over his chest as he did so. With a sigh, he closed his eyes and brought his right arm forwards to the children while his left reached out and firmly placed itself around the trunk of the tree. With a tug he pulled it up out of the ground. Opening his eyes, he saw the two girls stare at him in surprise before they looked to the extended hand towards them. You'll need to hold onto me. It's easier that way. Nursery took hold of the wrist first with a gentle tug, though Jack was much slower, showing a great deal of trepidation in regards to getting close to him, let alone to touch him. Her eyes moved between the hand and himself as she moved closer inch by inch. Her left hand slowly reached out before placing itself atop Nursery's, avoiding contact with him. Sorry, you just feel strange to me. I think touching you would be bad. Jack apologized to him, though he felt more confusion at her words than anything else. He would have assumed it was because of the last time they met one another they actively tried to kill the opposite. To his knowledge she died during the chaos of his mind tearing itself apart. Do you not remember me? Jack blinked once. Nope. You just feel like us but different. Very angry. She grimaced and leaned back a touch from him, moving closer to Nursery as she did so. Like Santa but meaner. Santa was nice, you feel cold. But you're helping us, so you're not a bad person. He didn't know if he should feel comforted or disturbed that she could not recall him, so he settled on putting the matter to the back of his mind. Pursing his lips and turning his eyes to Sully as the redhead approached, then placed a hand on his shoulder and gripped tight. How long will it take? Instead of replying, he triggered the use of teleportation. Within the next second, they found themselves in the midst of the clearing with the sounds of busy servants ringing in his ears. Even he was surprised by the quantity as he turned around, finding it much larger than when he had left and with most of the complement walking around doing something or other. Wow! The exclamation of Nursery was one of pure excitement. The girl released him and looked around with clear amazement in her posture, matched only by Jack who was just as awed but much more silent about it. There's so many people. Ash, you're back. He turned to the voice, Boudica approaching him with a smile on her face which only widened as she turned her eyes to his group. And you've found some more guests for the party. She looked past him to the smaller tree in his hand, raising an eyebrow as amusement danced across her face. And I'm certain that can be put to some good use. I'll leave you all to it then. He handed the tree to Sully. The boy started in surprise at suddenly having it thrust into his arms but he held onto it. He took a single step away from the group and was nearly about to teleport, only stopped when Nursery turned around at his words, sending him a look of surprise as well as being visibly disheartened by his words. You're going to leave already. I have to ensure the Singularity is safe enough to be occupied. He explained to her without missing a beat, gesturing to the sword on his back. Besides, news of this newly arrived conflict between Santa and Krampus is cause enough for me to investigate further. Hopefully it will have resolved itself, but in the event it has not I will act accordingly to prevent the festivities from being spoiled. A sudden bout of coughing turned his head to the source. Boudica had her fist over her face and was hunched over. A few seconds more and she pulled the hand back, visibly startled by his words, opening and closing her mouth several times before she raised her hand and spoke in a rather quick tone of voice. Could you repeat that for me? I'm fairly certain I just heard something utterly insane. Was it hard to believe? The scraps of knowledge told him that Krampus was a common figure when it came to Christmas. He was more surprised that he had not been warned about them beforehand. It would have made a great deal more sense to alert them to a potential danger to the holidays, but perhaps they had overlooked the potential of Krampus appearing at all. You did not hear incorrectly. He pointed to Nursery and Jack. These two tell me they witnessed a fight between Santa and the demon Krampus. I am returning to my role with the additional task of keeping the Singularity safe, hopefully before it encounters Ritska. I will report my progress. In the meantime, I would advise you to keep yourselves confined to the camp until I call back. Look to the archers for help if it should come to the worst. He did not wait for a reply. Time was of the essence and it was best that he depart. Hold it right there, Juan. Another interruption. He paused, turning to the latest voice and watching the aspect of Amaterasu rush towards him with her paw raised. He internally blinked a moment later as he tried to consider how he had come to the conclusion of her identity, though he quickly dismissed it. Her barely noticeable divine nature was proof enough to him. The animalistic woman slid to a halt in front of him, breathing in and out before she thrust something into his hands, a small brown paper bag, and then pulled her hands back, pointing a claw directly at his nose with a serious look on her face. Those are for Goshujin-sama only. Don't take one. Silence. He opened up the bag with his other hand and looked inside, some manner of swirling breaded product, then looked back to the woman and pinched his brows together. While he was certain that Ritsuka would appreciate them, there was one matter that did confuse him just a little. You understand I am trying to avoid them, yes. How would you suppose I deliver them to him if I am trying to remain hidden? Tamamo Cat paused for a moment, looking as though she had literally just considered that small flaw in the here and now. Perhaps her ability to speak had made him briefly forget that she was of the berserker class, and through one definition or the other, she was insane by human standards. Something Boudica agreed with if the groan she gave and the pinching of her brows was any indication. Aha! Tamamo Cat pointed at him and grinned with a smile that was all teeth, and notably smug. Write him a note. A decent plan. With a single flaw. I'm illiterate. Tamamo Cat's face turned to a mask. She looked him dead in the eyes before uttering only a single word. Seriously, Juan, do you think I would joke about that? It seemed an odd topic that no one would benefit from. Besides, he had given up on trying to mimic humor at this point. He was just pointing out a flaw in her plan that she would not have been aware of. I could leave it with the next batch of servants that I call forth for a distraction, though would it not be better for you to leave them as they were? Tamamo Cat visibly grimaced for a moment before she blinked, eyes widening as she reached out and took the paper bag from his hands and just stepped right up beside him. He leaned away from her sudden proximity. I've thought of a simple solution. Just take me with you, Juan. I can surprise Goshujin-sama myself. Are you not needed here? This is worth more, she declared without missing a beat, voice so confident that he doubted she would have ever considered another answer. She looked him dead in the eyes with an expression of utmost seriousness. I have gone too long without showing Goshujin-sama my amazing skills as a maid in this way. I can actually prove to him just how powerful I truly am in the kitchen. When he tastes my succulent goods, Juan, he will never wish for me to leave. An annoyed sigh from Sully. Must you phrase it in that misleading way? He stepped around Nursery and Jack and started to lead them away, sending a still disapproving look towards Tamamo Cat as he did so. There are children present who do not need to hear such things. With those words, he departed with the tree still in hand. Boudica exhaled and turned to him. We can spare her for a short time at least. We're making good enough progress on all the decorations. Besides, I'm sure it'll be fine in the end. She smiled at him and nodded once. Master could probably do with a light snack, but not too much. He needs to have some room left over for the actual food we're going to serve him. Was this where it was really going? He looked to Tamamo Cat in silence as she stared up at him. The expression she was giving him only caused him to lean further from her. Aside from the fact that her mere proximity to him had his body covered in a twitching feeling, as though something was crawling on his skin, her physical similarities to the lichens did little put him at ease. Still, so long as she could actually delay Ritsuka, he saw little reason in denying her request, so long as she kept her involvement secret and did not inform him of the party, even accidentally. He shrugged his shoulders to her and then nodded his head up and down. Once he deposited her with the next group, he could start looking into this Krampus situation. She would be their problem to deal with, one he wasn't equipped to handle. Fine. He grunted to her, keeping his expression blank as he turned from her and towards Boudica. I shall keep in touch with Berserker. Once I have news of Krampus, I shall pass it along to you. All right then, be careful out there. We don't need any unnecessary risks. He appreciated the warning, even if it wasn't needed. With a flash of light, both he and Tamamo Cat were whisked away. The snowball fight had ended with a victory for Team Santa, something he would have liked to take a bit more pride in were it not for the way they ended up claiming victory. Evidently, accidentally knocking Santoria's hat off with a stray snowball was a surefire way to ending up with Excalibur turning the world into an avalanche and burying you up to your neck in snow. At least she left them some presents, but she phrased it more in the way of giving commiserations to losers. Still, it was rather fun and he even saw the director getting rather excited about it. especially when she pointed and laughed at Sasaki at the end, though he was a little unsure as to why she then felt the need to throw snow at his head at that point. If Marie hadn't stepped in, he was sure she would have kept on going. That being said, it was a fun time all around. How was your first snowball fight, Mash? The question earned him a surprised blink, then a short hum of thought from the girl as she pulled her lips into a thin line, cupping her chin and then nodding her head up and down after a few seconds of silence. I didn't think it would end up being so much fun. Maybe it's the costume or maybe it's the season, but it felt like I was really pumped up, senpai. As though I could keep on fighting for hours. Clasping her hands into fists, a tiny but excited grin moved across her face as she clutched her hands close to her chest. At first I was worried that someone might end up getting hurt, but I just completely forgot about that towards the end. I didn't mind any of it and was just playing to have as much fun as possible. Is that how it was for you as well, senpai? With a chuckle, he nodded his head. Yeah, snowball fights aren't about winning or losing, they're just about having as much fun as you can with everyone involved. It's just one of those things that you have to end up doing. Pausing, he shrugged his shoulders. I guess that winning is nice, but it's more about the spirit of the game. The real win was the friends we made laugh along the way and all of that. Mash smiled at his words, clearly in agreement with them. HMPH. A cold grunt had them both turn their heads to Santoria leading from the front, casting a glance over her shoulder and fixing the both of them with an icy look. Those are only the words of those who taste defeat and look for some excuse. Regardless of the manner of fight, you must always aim for victory. Anything less is to insult your opponent. Those fools sought to delay Christmas, thus they were deserving to face the full might of Santa and the Christmas spirit, though if you revel in the victory, that is acceptable. She was probably still mad that Astolfo accidentally knocked her hat off her head. He'd certainly memorized the face she made in the immediate aftermath of the incident. As well as the face of Astolfo, who had gone from laughing maniac to dead man walking within the span of a single second. Quite frankly, the way his complexion turned white as the snow was almost cartoonish in nature. You should look to the elf manager. Santoria gave a wave of her hand in the direction of the director, who visibly twitched at being referred to as an elf at the moment. Though Ritsuka noted she had now been promoted to elf manager, which was better than elf number 1. Did you not see the silent glee in her eyes? The desire to win as she fought. Whether or not she showed a tremendous amount of skill is secondary. She understood that it was a battle to win and fought accordingly. Olga made a low growling noise as she jerked her head to the side, folding her arms over her chest as she did so. It was my first time ever doing something like that. I doubt you were some sort of prodigy when you first picked up a sword. The quiet grumble was met with silence from Santoria for a good few seconds, then a single scoff from them. That much should go without saying. The desire to win is important. Do not stop until you claim it. His brows furrowed a touch at the back of Santoria's head as he considered the possibility of something. Was Artoria just really competitive? It suddenly made an awful lot of sense to him if that was the case, especially when the moment she got involved she immediately went for the fastest route to victory. Is there some reason you are staring at me, Rudolph? The words snapped him back into the present, realizing that Santoria was now looking at him with those pale yellow eyes. Rolling his lips inwards, he opted to keep this theory to himself and shook his head from side to side. No, just committing your words to memory is all. Making sure to always remember the path to victory. Go for the win every time and never stop no matter how often you lose. A grunt from Santoria and a twitch of her lips, nodding her head up and down. Good. You understand this well enough. Oh yeah, she definitely didn't like losing. Something caught his eye to the left, sounds and laughter accompanied by distant shouts. He turned his head to the direction and found himself catching a glimpse of something shining within the snow. He squinted at the shape and found himself more than a little surprised at what it was. That was definitely Vrindari in the distance, accompanied by another figure who he would assume was Gareth. Both of them stood atop something with their back to them and staring down at something, all the while they were calling out. Ending his walk, he raised his brows as he looked at the distance. He turned to see if any of the others had noticed and quickly found that he wasn't quite alone in noticing it either. Santoria's head had whirled in that direction almost immediately, perhaps as soon as he had, and was fixing the distant group with a piercing stare before she opened her mouth and spoke. "We are going. None shall escape Santa's sights, especially not those of the Round Table." He didn't quite smirk, but he came close. No matter how much she tried to comprehend the image in front of her, she was utterly unable to do so. Her lips pulled into a frown and her hands found a home on her hips. She opened and closed her mouth several times before she grunted and shook her head from side to side. After that incident with throwing snow, she opted to avoid putting too much effort into thinking about all of this logically. The only conclusion she could come to was that there was some manner of subtle spell that was affecting the minds of everyone involved. That was the only conclusion that made sense to her. "Are you all right?" The close whisper had her flinch. Her eyes darted towards the direction of the sound and found Marie standing right next to her with a touch of worry on her face. "You look as though you're having a little bit of trouble." She very nearly let out a derisive laugh at her words. She settled for a half-hearted huff and a roll of the eyes. "A little trouble. That would imply that this wasn't something to..." Cutting herself off, she brought her hands up and pinched her brow and shook her head from side to side once more. "This is going to end up in a report and then it's going to be an utter fiasco when it gets out. All of those, they're going to look at me as though I'm some idiot who doesn't take any of this seriously. I'm supposed to be the one who can keep a cool head and here I am throwing snow at the heads of servants and running around dressed like an idiot." Pulling at the outfit, she let out a low hiss as she did so. I could understand a small party to keep morale up. I would be perfectly tolerant of something like that, but every single time there is an attempt something ends up going wrong or some servant breaks in and steals something or breaks something or..." Her hands placed themselves against her face, she let out a groan into her palms. It just wasn't fair. She couldn't even let people plan out a party without them literally forming a singularity. Even if there was no proof, there was no way they weren't involved with it. It was probably one of those divine spirits again who was doing this. It was just utterly humiliating. She couldn't even keep order around Chaldea for a single week without it breaking down for one reason or another. "Hey." Something touched her shoulder. She pulled her hands down and looked to see Marie giving her a faint smile. "I don't think it's the sort of thing that you should be getting all worked up about. It's a bit chaotic, but that's what fun is about, though at the same time, I'm probably not the best person to ask about balancing work and pleasure," she pointed out with a wry smile. A dry huff escaped her at the words of the French queen, rubbing her hands over her eyes and placing them on her hips. The fact she could make that sort of joke was just bewildering to her. Marie patted her twice more on the shoulder. "Initially, I didn't know if I was going to be able to come out here, but I thought that it would be such a shame if I missed and I didn't want my own bad mood to spoil all the fun." The smile softened. "Though I'm happy I did show up to participate in all of this. It's taken my mind off everything. Just running around and doing whatever you feel like in the moment without worrying about the consequences. That's probably what these sorts of situations are all about. I can't afford to be doing that." "Of course you can." Marie chided her gently, "the same can be said of everyone. Even Ritska over there." Her head jerked towards the direction of the teenager. She turned just as he climbed up the hill once again and was laughing to himself as he dragged the cross-shield-turned sleigh behind him. Because apparently they all decided to go sledding down the hill and used metal shields to do so. The utterly carefree expressions on both Ritska and Mash were more than a little odd. Perhaps it was because she never would have imagined the latter making that sort of face before. I think when you have fun moments, it makes you appreciate everything a little more. It makes you remember that there's something worth fighting for. That's why all of us were summoned to begin with. Not just to save this Christmas, but all the other Christmases that will follow. Even if not for ourselves, then for those who follow in our footsteps." Marie continued onwards, then fell silent. Olga turned back towards her as the queen fidgeted on the spot and brought her hand up to mess with her hair, curling it around her fingers almost nervously. "Was that a good pep talk?" I've never really tried doing something like that before and I thought it was going really well. The queen sounded a far cry from the confident voice she had a moment ago, a flicker of doubt in her eyes as she rolled her lips. I'm sure that someone else would have made a better speech but nothing. Olga cut her off with a shake of her head. She got the message easy enough, even if it wasn't for herself, it was at least worth it for those who would appreciate it. That's what it was all about in the end. If it made them work harder and more determined to see this through to the end, then she couldn't hardly berate them for something like that. It was an adequate speech. Marie smiled at the words and then threw her arms around her. She locked up at the contact and the suddenness of the hug as the queen rocked them both back and forth before releasing her and pulling back. Now come on. We can't let Ritska and Mash have all the fun. Besides, I've got to have some pride as a queen to make sure that I'm at least putting up a fight against Arthur, and you don't want to lose completely to Ritska, do you? She was pulling her along before she could even get a word out, dragging her up the hill and directly to Ritska and the others. The boy turned to her and briefly widened his eyes in surprise before he rushed out with an excited string of words. Are you coming to slay as well, Director? Absolutely. Marie spoke for the both of them before she could get a word out, but it wasn't worth trying to argue against her. Not least because she couldn't physically overpower the servant and her enthusiasm was like some sort of rapid disease. The idea had burrowed its way into her head at this point. We're going to show you just how strong the leader elves are, right Olga? A huff. Standing at the sidelines and groaning will not make this end any swifter. Getting involved is only logical. The look he gave her was rather annoying, that knowing smirk on his face as though he was privy to some sort of secret that she wasn't aware of. Mash was just looking at her with silent awe. Oh. Arthur turned to them with a raised eyebrow. So you grew tired of dawdling, did you? Good. No elf of mine shall step back from the front lines for long. She bit back the retort that she wasn't an elf. She hadn't made progress with it so far and she doubted it was going to change anytime soon. That didn't stop her from glaring at them though, the fact it earned her an amused smirk was rather grating. You'll need this then, if you are to compete. Verndari approached them with the shield, a loose bit of rope tied around the handle inside of it to act as reins. Handing it to Marie and stepping back. I wish you fortune in this task, if nothing else. King Arthur has proven themselves to be rather formidable thus far. Yes, because she was using an actual sleigh and had demanded they go again after she lost the race the first 6 or so times. That was the only reason they had been around as long as they had in the first place. Come on, Olga. With an excited giggle, Marie took her by the wrist and dragged her again, nearly pulling her over if she hadn't managed to catch her feet at the last second, coming upon the edge of the hill and at the mouth of the incline leading straight down to the clearing. She dropped the shield down, and in the next moment, Olga found herself sitting on the shield with Marie's arms wrapped around her waist and the queen breathing into the back of her neck. She froze up from the position before she furrowed her brows and looked around. Wait a moment. Aren't you the rider servant? Why aren't you the one in front? A giggle from behind. Because that wouldn't be very sporting, would it? Besides, Ritska is the one doing all of this himself. Sure enough, there was a crunch of snow and she turned her head to see Fujimaru place Mash's shield down next to her and take a seat inside of it. Mash took a position behind him and placed her hands on his shoulders. Ritska sent her a challenging grin, an almost childish taunt as well. Then Arthur's sleigh formed next to them and the king assumed an almost casual position with one leg crossed over the other, glancing to the others with a raised eyebrow and an almost taunting grin on her features as though she already knew what the outcome was going to be. That stung a little. With a glare at the king, she wrapped the ropes around her hands and pulled tightly. She'd show her for calling her an elf all those times. It would be pretty embarrassing if Santa managed to lose a race against a mere elf, or something like that. It might have been exceedingly petty of her, but the thought of it was reward enough that she was now incentivized to win. On your marks. The other 3 servants took their positions behind them, ready to give them all the starting push. Get set. Her eyes narrowed, she took in a sharp breath. Go. A shove from the back, then they were rushing downhill. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.